Hello, and welcome to Mythos and Logos. The jar sat buried in Egyptian sand for over 1600 years. Inside it, leather-bound books waited in perfect darkness, their pages filled with words that had once threatened an empire. Someone had hidden them with care, wrapping each volume, sealing the container, digging by starlight. That person walked away, hoping, perhaps praying, that someday these texts would be found again. In December of 1945, a young Egyptian man digging for fertilizer at the base of a cliff broke that jar open. Gold lettering caught the desert sun. Ancient words spilled into modern hands. And in that moment, the longest game of hide-and-seek in Christian history finally ended. But here is what makes this story extraordinary. The man who found these books had no idea what they were. His mother would burn some of them as kindling to cook dinner. Others would be sold for less than the price of a goat. They would scatter across Cairo, nearly lost forever, fought over by academics, smuggled to Europe, dismissed by American universities as worthless. It would take a Swiss psychologist's intervention, 35,000 francs in cash, and 3 decades of academic battles before the world could finally read what was written on those pages. And when scholars did read them, they discovered a Christianity so different, so radical, so strange that it seemed to come from another universe entirely. Tonight, we will follow the twin journeys of these remarkable texts. First, the ancient journey, how they came to be written, what they taught, why they had to be hidden. And second, the modern journey, how they nearly vanished again in our own time before being rescued at the last possible moment. We will meet the teachers who wrote them, the authorities who condemned them, and the visionaries who recognized that these words, for all their strangeness, spoke to something eternal in the human soul. We will explore why, after 17 centuries of silence, these texts speak to us now, perhaps more powerfully than ever. Before we get started, I'd really appreciate your like and subscription if you enjoy what you see here. It's the primary way I know to keep creating. Thank you so much for that support. I also find it fascinating to connect with viewers worldwide, so please drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and your local time. Let your thoughts become gossamer light as they float back to a December morning in 1945 beneath the cliffs of Upper Egypt, where the Nile winds through desert and the past lies just beneath your feet, waiting. The jar at the foot of the cliff. The cliff called Jabal al-Tarif rises abruptly from the Nile Valley floor, 6 kilometers from the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt. Composed of soft limestone layered over millennia, it catches the morning sun and glows pale gold against the deeper gold of the surrounding desert. At its base, boulders lie scattered where they have fallen over centuries, some as large as houses, creating pockets of shadow even at midday. The rock face itself bears the marks of ancient quarrying, hollowed spaces where stone was cut away 2,000 years ago, natural caves deepened by human hands. In December, when the Nile has receded from its seasonal flood, the air holds a crystalline quality. Sounds carry. You can hear a camel bell from a kilometre away. On a morning in December of 1945, 7 men were working beneath these cliffs. 3 were brothers, Muhammad, Khalifa, and Abu al-Majd, sons of Ali and Ahmad of the Al-Saman clan from the village of Al-Qasa. The others were camel drivers, hired for the day's labour. They had come to dig for sabach, a fertilizer made from decomposed bird droppings and ancient organic matter. This was common work in the region. The cliffs, honeycombed with caves, provided excellent conditions for accumulating the nitrate-rich soil that farmers prized. The men worked with mattocks and shovels, moving earth, loading the camel panniers, the steady rhythm of physical labour under the winter sun. Muhammad Ali al-Saman was the eldest brother, 28 years old, broad-shouldered from years of heavy work. Picture him there that morning, your mind's eye watching as he drives his mattock into the sandy soil, near a large boulder. The tool strikes something that rings, not stone but something hollow, ceramic. He calls to his younger brother Abu, age 18, who begins to dig more carefully. The earth comes away, revealing the curved shoulder of a large jar, reddish earthenware, its neck sealed. They work around it, freeing it from the matrix of sand and time. When they have it exposed, Muhammad crouches beside it. The jar is substantial, perhaps 2 feet tall, the kind of vessel used for storing grain or oil, but sealed as if its contents were precious. In that moment, Muhammad hesitates. His mind fills with the stories he has grown up with, tales told by firelight, warnings passed from generation to generation, a sealed jar buried near ancient cliffs. Who knows what spirit might have been trapped inside? The desert is full of jinn, beings of smokeless fire, capricious and dangerous. The old stories are clear. Some jinn wait in sealed vessels, prisoners from the time of Solomon, and woe to the man who releases them. The morning is cold. Muhammad is tired from digging. He decides to leave the jar, to return for it later, when he has thought about what to do, perhaps when he has brought more men. But the hours pass and curiosity gnaws at him. What if there is treasure inside? Gold, jewels, something of value. The family needs money. His father was murdered 7 months ago. The wound is still raw. By midday, Muhammad returns to the boulder alone. He looks at the jar sitting there in the sand where they left it. Fear and curiosity war in his chest. Finally, decisiveness wins. He raises his mattock high and brings it down hard. The jar shatters. For a moment, he steps back, half expecting the rush of smoke and fire, the jinn's emergence, its rage at centuries of imprisonment. Nothing happens. No smoke, no fire, no vengeful spirit. Instead, something else entirely. Inside the broken vessel, wrapped in leather and old cloth, are books. Not scrolls in the old style, but bound volumes. Codices, their covers tooled and decorated, their pages covered with writing in neat columns. Gold lettering catches the sunlight. There are many of them, perhaps a dozen or more, some large, some smaller, all preserved in the dry climate of the cliff's shadow. Muhammad stares at them. They are clearly old, clearly valuable to someone, but to him, they are unreadable. The script is Coptic, the old Egyptian language written in Greek letters, and Muhammad cannot read even Arabic well, let alone this ancient tongue. He gathers the books carefully, wrapping them back in the cloth, and carries them home to Al-Qasr. In his hands, though he does not know it, Muhammad Ali al-Saman carries what will come to be known as the Nag Hammadi library, 13 leather-bound codices containing 52 texts, most of them completely unknown to the modern world. Most of them written by people who called themselves Gnostics, knowers, possessors of secret wisdom. These books contain gospels that never made it into the Bible, revelations excluded from scripture, creation myths that turned Genesis on its head, cosmologies of breathtaking complexity and strangeness. They are the preserved voice of a movement that was hunted, condemned, burned out of existence, its followers scattered, its books destroyed wherever they were found. And now, after 16 centuries in darkness, they have returned to the light in the calloused hands of a young Egyptian who thinks perhaps he has found something to sell, maybe enough for a few pounds, unaware that he holds in his arms some of the most important religious texts ever discovered. The jar is broken, the seal is lifted, the long concealment has ended. But the story of how these books came to be buried, why they were hidden, and what their rediscovery would mean, that story has only just begun. Blood and revenge. 7 months before Muhammad found the jar, his father was murdered. To understand what happened to the texts after their discovery, you need to understand this: that Muhammad's hands, when they broke open that ancient vessel, were already stained with blood. Not metaphorically, literally. Recent blood, human blood. It was May of 1945 when Ali Muhammad Khalifa, Muhammad's father, was found dead. He had been a night guard for irrigation machinery, a solitary job that involved walking the fields and canals in darkness, watching for thieves. They found his body near the hamlet of Hamra at the foot of the very same cliffs where the jar would later be discovered. He had been shot in the head. Next to him lay another body, decapitated, a man from Hamra that Ali had apparently caught stealing and killed before being shot himself. Muhammad identified his father's body. In that moment, something ancient and implacable took root in his heart. This was not a matter for police, for courts, for the distant abstraction of Egyptian law. This was family. This was blood. In the villages of Upper Egypt, such matters are settled in ways that predate Islam, predate Christianity, predate perhaps the pyramids themselves. Blood calls for blood. A son's duty is absolute. Suspicion fell immediately on Ahmad Ismail, son of the local sheriff from Hamra. The dead thief had been found near his family's home. It made sense. An act of revenge, perhaps, or an ambush gone wrong. Muhammad swore his oath that night. Surrounded by his brothers and his mother, he would find Ahmad Ismail. He would avenge his father. This was not anger speaking. This was older than anger. This was obligation carved into his bones. The weeks passed. Muhammad carried his grief and his purpose with him, as he worked, as he ate, as he slept. He asked questions. He watched. Then came the day, perhaps a week after finding the jar, perhaps a month, accounts differ, when word reached Muhammad that Ahmad Ismail had been seen near Al-Qasr, that he had fallen asleep by the roadside. Muhammad's mother, the widow Ahmad, knew what had to be done. She armed her sons with sharpened mattocks, the same tools they used for digging, the same tool that would break open the jar. She sent them to execute blood vengeance. They found Ahmad where he slept. They fell upon him. The mattocks rose and fell, rose and fell. When it was over, Ahmad Ismail was not simply dead, but dismembered, hacked to pieces there by the road. Muhammad would later say to an interviewer, his voice matter of fact, without shame or boasting, I took my knife and cut out his heart and ate most of his pieces. Whether this is literally true or a formulaic statement of complete vengeance, no one can say, but the meaning is clear. The debt was paid, the circle was closed. Justice, as Muhammad understood it, had been served. A police investigation followed. Of course, the brothers were arrested, detained, but Al-Qasr is a small village, and Hamradum's sheriff was widely hated. No witnesses came forward. Fear of the Al-Saman family ran deep, and beneath that fear was something else, a kind of communal approval. The law said murder. The village said justice. The investigation stalled. The brothers were released after a short detention. The crime went officially unsolved. The blood feud continues to this day. This, then, was the man who found the Gnostic texts. Not a scholar, not an archaeologist, not a priest. A peasant farmer and part-time labourer. A man who had recently killed another man with a mattock and thought nothing strange about it. A man living in a world where ancient codes still governed behaviour, where the night was full of jinn, where sealed jars might contain either treasure or disaster. When Muhammad brought the books home, his mother saw only old paper and leather, dry as tinder. She had a cooking fire to maintain. She had meals to prepare for a family that had just lost its father and primary earner. Some of those precious codices, pages that scholars would later weep to see photographs of, went directly into the flames, so that the smell of burning papyrus filled the small house. Ancient wisdom became heat and smoke and ash. Muhammad watched this with neither alarm nor regret. They were, as he would say decades later, just rubbish, burned as kindling. Imagine the scene. A small mud brick house in Al-Qasr, a village that clings to the edge of the Nile Valley, as villages have clung there since the time of the pharaohs. Inside, Ahmad tends her cooking fire. She has lost her husband. Her sons have avenged him, but they are marked men now, living under the shadow of blood debt. Money is scarce. The household must eat. She reaches for fuel. In the corner, stacked among other items brought back from digging at the cliffs, are these old books, these bundles of leather and paper. They are bone dry from centuries underground. They catch easily, the flames rise, yellow and bright. The leather curls and blackens. The papyrus pages, their surfaces covered with careful Coptic script in soot-based ink, begin to curl, to char, to disintegrate. Words that have survived since the 3rd or 4th century AD. Words that were copied by hand by someone who called them God-written. Words that were hidden with love and care. Words that waited patiently through the rise and fall of empires. The coming of Islam, the Crusades, the modern age. Those words now become carbon and heat. How many texts were lost this way? We will never know. Perhaps whole gospels unknown to us. Revelations, secret teachings, visions of Christ that no one in the modern world will ever read because they were burned to cook lentils or flatbread in May or June of 1946. The irony is almost unbearable. These books survived Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, who ordered their destruction in 367 AD. They survived whatever purge led to their burial. They survived 16 centuries of sand and silence. But they nearly did not survive Ahmad's cooking fire. Muhammad, however, kept some of them, not for their content, which remained a mystery to him, but because he thought perhaps they might have value. Old things sometimes did. Antiquities dealers in Cairo paid money for such items, he had heard. There was a Coptic teacher in Nag Hammadi named Raghib Andarawus al-Qus Abd as-Sajid, the brother-in-law of the local priest, a man known to have an interest in old things. Perhaps he would buy one. Muhammad took a codex to Raghib. Picture the negotiation. The labourer and the teacher, one holding a leather-bound book he cannot read, the other recognising immediately that this is something ancient, something Christian, something potentially important. They settled on a price. 11 Egyptian pounds. At the time, this was perhaps equivalent to a month's wages for a labourer, maybe less, for what scholars would later recognise as one of the most significant manuscript discoveries of the 20th century. Muhammad received the price of a goat or two. Raghib took the codex home. He looked through it, recognised it was written in Coptic, understood that it was very old. He could make out some words, fragments of meaning. He contacted someone in Cairo who might know more. Word began to spread, slowly, through the network of Coptic scholars and antiquities enthusiasts in Egypt. An old manuscript from Nag Hammadi, possibly Gnostic, possibly important. Meanwhile, Muhammad distributed the remaining codices among friends and acquaintances in Al-Qasa. This was both generosity and practicality. If the books had value, others should benefit. If they brought trouble, let the trouble be dispersed. The texts scattered through the village, individual codices passing from hand to hand, some stored in homes, some offered for sale. The library, fragmenting, even as word of its existence, began to reach Cairo. One codex made its way to a man named Bahij Ali, known in the village as the One-Eyed. He had connections in Cairo, knew people in the antiquities trade. He gathered what texts he could and travelled to the capital to sell them. There he found a dealer, Phocion Tano, a Cypriot who had been in the business for years and knew the value of such things. Tano bought everything Bahij Ali had brought, 9 codices in total. He paid well, far more than Raghib had paid Muhammad. Bahij Ali returned to Al-Qasa with money in his pockets, spreading word that these old books were worth real money after all. But by then, the damage was done. Some texts were burned, others were scattered. Individual pages had been torn out, separated from their codices. Some lost, some sold separately. The leather covers were coming apart in the dry heat. The papyrus, though remarkably preserved by the cliff's shade and Egypt's climate, was nevertheless fragile after 16 centuries. Rough handling caused damage. Each transfer from hand to hand risked further deterioration, and something else was happening, something that would complicate matters enormously. The Egyptian government was becoming aware of the discovery. New laws regarding antiquities were being drafted, or rather, old laws were being remembered and enforced. Who owned these texts? The finders? The dealers? The state? And if the state, could they be sold abroad? Should they leave Egypt at all? Bureaucracy and greed, two forces as old as civilization itself, were about to collide with scholarship and religious history. The battle for the books was beginning, and it would take years to resolve. The battle for the books. On the 4th of October, 1946, Togo Mina, curator of the Coptic Museum in Cairo, made a purchase that would change his life and, in a sense, change history. For 250 Egyptian pounds, he acquired from Raghib, the teacher from Nag Hammadi, what would come to be known as Codex 3 of the library. He brought it back to the museum, unwrapped it carefully, began to examine its contents. 5 texts, each one unknown to modern scholarship. The Secret Book of John, the Gospel of the Egyptians, Gnostos the Blessed, the Sophia of Jesus Christ, the Dialogue of the Saviour. Togo Mina was a careful scholar, a Coptic Christian himself, deeply versed in the history of his people and their literature. As he read through the Secret Book of John, he recognized immediately what he was holding. This was Gnostic literature, the real thing, not a church father's description or denunciation, but an actual Gnostic text, written by believers, for believers. He contacted 2 French scholars, Daumas and Corbin, who were in Egypt at the time. They came to the museum, examined the codex, confirmed its Gnostic character. Daumas returned to Paris and began planning an edition for publication. Then, in September of 1947, a young French scholar named Jean Dorès arrived in Egypt for research. Togo Mina told him about the discovery. Dorès, who would later write the first comprehensive account of the texts in his book, The Secret Books of the Egyptian Gnostics, immediately understood the magnitude of what had been found. These texts could revolutionize understanding of early Christianity, of Gnosticism, of the diversity that had existed before orthodoxy hardened into its final forms. He passed information to Etienne Drioton, director of the Egyptian Department of Antiquities, and to Henri Charles Puech, a historian of religion in Paris. At this point, something strange began to happen. The academic world, which one might expect to have erupted with excitement, instead responded with a mixture of indifference and active obstruction. Scholars began to compete rather than collaborate. Information was hoarded rather than shared. Credit for discoveries was claimed and counterclaimed. Years later, when the dust had settled, Dorès would write, "If it were all to be gone through again, I confess that, although for my own part, I received every possible assistance from the able, scientific persons concerned, to whom I am profoundly grateful, I would probably think twice before I would again embroil myself for the sake of a discovery liable to arouse so many envies and jealousies." What was happening? Why this ugliness around texts about divine wisdom and spiritual enlightenment? The answer lies partly in academic politics, the pressure to publish first, to make one's reputation, to secure funding and position. But there is something else too, something darker. Many Christian scholars, particularly in the 1940s and 50s, did not want to take Gnosticism seriously. It was heresy. It was a dead end. It had been rightly suppressed by the Church Fathers. Why waste time and resources on texts that represented, in their view, a perversion of true Christianity? Meanwhile, the texts themselves continued their precarious journey through the Cairo antiquities market. Phocion Tano, the Cypriot dealer who had bought 9 codices from Bahij Ali, was represented by a woman named Maria Dattari, daughter of a noted Italian numismatist. In October of 1948, she contacted Doresa and showed him what Tano had acquired. Doresa made a survey of the contents. His hands trembled as he turned the pages. Here, in fragile papyrus that could tear at a rough touch, was the Gospel of Thomas, the jewel of the entire library, a collection of sayings attributed to Jesus, some familiar from the canonical Gospels, others completely unknown, all of them strange, paradoxical, luminous. Doresa immediately informed Drayton and recommended that the Coptic Museum purchase the codices. But when word reached Maria de Tari, through a French newspaper in Cairo, that the Egyptian government was intervening to acquire the texts, she panicked. She filed a lawsuit, claiming ownership. The legal battle would drag on for 3 years. During those 3 years, the codices sat inaccessible, locked away while lawyers argued, while scholars fumed, while the world remained ignorant of their contents. And there was another codex, another drama playing out in parallel. Albert Ide, a Belgian antiquities dealer, had somehow acquired one of the most important codices of all. He tried to generate interest from the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, from several university collections in the United States, from the New York Bollingen Foundation. The response was almost universal indifference. They did not want Gnostic papyri. They had no money for such things. One after another, doors closed. Fearing legal trouble if he returned to Egypt with the codex, Ide flew from the United States directly to Belgium. There, in 1949, he placed the codex in a safe deposit box in a Brussels bank, secured by a secret password. And there it sat, in darkness again, locked away again, perhaps forever. The Gospel of Thomas, meanwhile, remained wrapped in Maria de Tari's lawsuit. The secret book of John sat in the Coptic Museum, but could not be properly studied or published because of the chaos surrounding the other texts. Other codices were still in private hands in Al-Qasr or Cairo, their locations unknown, their fate uncertain. One of the most important manuscript discoveries in history was scattering, fragmenting, disappearing again before it could be properly documented. Scholars who knew what was at stake felt a kind of desperation. Time was not on their side. Papyrus, for all its durability in Egyptian conditions, is nevertheless fragile. Each handling risks damage. And there were darker possibilities. What if a fire broke out? What if thieves stole the text to sell page by page? What if political instability in Egypt led to chaos in which priceless manuscripts simply vanished? The situation seemed hopeless. And then, in 1952, an unlikely hero appeared. Not an Egyptologist, not a biblical scholar, not even primarily an academic. A Swiss psychologist with a deep interest in mythology and the human unconscious. A man who had spent decades studying alchemy, mysticism, and the symbols that recur in human dreams and religions across cultures. His name was Carl Gustav Jung, and he was about to save the Gnostics one more time. Jung's 35,000 francs. Brussels, May 10th, 1952. Gil Kispel, a young professor from the University of Utrecht, walks into a bank carrying a cheque for 35,000 Swiss francs. He has come to purchase a codex, the one Albert Ide placed in the safe deposit box 3 years earlier. Quispel is nervous. The money is not his own. It has come from an American philanthropist named George E. Page, arranged through Dr. Meyer, an associate of Carl Jung. If this transaction falls through, if something goes wrong, Quispel will have to return to Switzerland empty-handed, having failed in what may be the most important scholarly mission of his career. But let us step back. How did it come to this? How did a Swiss psychologist become involved in rescuing Gnostic manuscripts from oblivion? Jung had been interested in the Gnostics for most of his professional life. Early in his career, as he developed his theories of the unconscious, of archetypes, of the collective symbols that appear across human cultures, he found himself drawn again and again to Gnostic texts. The Gnostics seemed to have understood something profound about the human psyche, about the inner dramas that play out in the depths of consciousness. They're myths of the divine spark, trapped in matter, of Sophia's fall and yearning for restoration, of the journey of the soul through hostile spheres back to its source. These were not just theological speculations. They were, Jung believed, maps of psychological processes, symbols of individuation, of the integration of conscious and unconscious, of the painful birth of self-awareness. But Jung's knowledge of the Gnostics came primarily through secondary sources, through the church fathers who had condemned them, through fragments and summaries. He longed to read actual Gnostic texts, to hear their voice unmediated. When word reached him in the late 1940s that a Gnostic library had been discovered in Egypt, his interest intensified. Here was an opportunity to access the Gnostic mind directly, to test his theories, to deepen his understanding. He put Dr. Meyer onto the matter. Meyer began inquiries, tracked down Albert Ede's widow, learned about the Codex in Brussels, understood that it was at risk of disappearing forever. Jung contacted the Bollingen Foundation, which he had helped establish to support his work and the work of scholars in related fields. Would they fund the purchase? The Bollingen Foundation initially agreed, but at the last moment they withdrew, citing other commitments, excavations in Egypt that needed funding. Jung was devastated. Years of waiting, the chance finally within reach, and now it was slipping away. At that decisive moment, Dr. Meyer contacted Georgie Page, an American living near Zurich, a woman of means and cultural interests. He explained the situation. A unique manuscript, a chance to recover lost wisdom, a price of 35,000 francs. Would she help? She would. She wrote the check. And so Quispel found himself in Brussels with money in hand, meeting with an unnamed agent of Albert Ede's estate. The transaction was simple. Quispel handed over the check. The agent handed over the codex. Under his arm, wrapped carefully, Quispel carried what would come to be known as the Jung Codex. Codex, one of the Nag Hammadi library. He took it home to Utrecht. For a year and a half, it sat in his study while he translated and analysed it. The work was painstaking. Coptic is not an easy language. The texts were complex, elusive, full of symbols and technical terms, but gradually, meaning emerged. The Codex contained 5 works: the Prayer of the Apostle Paul, the Secret Book of James, the Gospel of Truth, the Treatise on the Resurrection, the Tripartite Tractate. The Gospel of Truth was particularly striking. Many scholars believe it was written by Valentinus himself, the Egyptian poet who came to Rome in the 2nd century and nearly became bishop, the man who developed the most sophisticated and influential form of Christian Gnosticism. If true, this was not just any Gnostic text. This was the voice of the tradition's greatest teacher, writing in his own words. When Quispel completed his first translation, he travelled to Lake Bollingen to show Jung. The old psychologist, now in his late 70s, listened as Quispel read passages aloud. Jung wept. He is reported to have said, "I have worked all my life to know the Gnostics. Now I hold their words in my hands." The Jung Codex was published in stages over the following years. It would have been enough to secure Quispel's reputation, to make Jung's final years intellectually rich beyond measure. But it was still only one codex of 13. The others remained scattered. Maria Dattari's lawsuit over the 9 codices held by Tanno was finally resolved in 1952. She lost. The Egyptian government acquired them for the Coptic Museum. By 1956, most of the library was finally in one place, available to scholars, though publication would remain slow and contentious. It would not be until 1959 that the Gospel of Thomas was published in English, not until 1977, 32 years after Muhammad Ali broke open the jar, that the entire library would be available to English readers. 32 years. A generation had lived and died. Children born the year of the discovery had grown to adulthood, married, had children of their own, before they could read what Muhammad had found. Why so long? Academic politics, competition for credit, the difficulty of translation, the need to establish authoritative texts. All these played a role, but perhaps something else too. Perhaps a lingering discomfort with the Gnostics themselves, with their strange cosmology, their rejection of the material world, their claim to possess secret knowledge. Perhaps a sense that these texts were embarrassing, that they represented a road not taken, a Christianity that could have been, but was not, and therefore perhaps should remain in obscurity. But they did not remain in obscurity. Slowly, through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the texts emerged into public consciousness. Scholars wrote about them. Popular writers discovered them. Jung's interest gave them legitimacy. And people began to ask, what do these texts actually say? Who were these Gnostics? And why do their words, written nearly 2,000 years ago, still sound so strange, so compelling, so disturbingly contemporary? The secret sayings. These are the secret sayings which the living Jesus spoke, and which Didymos Judas Thomas wrote down. So begins the Gospel of Thomas, the most famous and perhaps most important text in the Nag Hammadi library. It continues, and he said, "Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death." Not experience death, immortality through understanding. This is the Gnostic promise, stated simply, directly, without qualification. The Gospel contains 114 sayings, some brief, some extended, each one attributed to Jesus, but sounding like a Jesus few Christians would recognize. There are no birth narratives here, no miracles, no crucifixion, no resurrection, just sayings, wisdom, gnosis. Some sound familiar. Jesus said, "I am the light that is above them all. I am the all. From me did the all come forth, and unto me did the all extend. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there." This is immanence, the divine presence in matter itself, pantheism, hovering at the edge of Christianity. Others are cryptic, almost Zen-like in their paradoxical quality. Jesus said, "If they say to you, 'Where did you come from?' say to them, 'We came from the light,' the place where the light came into being on its own accord and established itself and became manifest through their image. If they say to you, 'Is it you?' say, 'We are its children and we are the elect of the living Father.' If they ask you, 'What is the sign of your Father in you?' say to them, 'It is movement and repose.'" Movement and repose. What does this mean? Scholars have debated for decades. Perhaps it refers to the dynamic balance of opposites, perhaps to the unity of contemplation and action, perhaps to something that cannot be captured in words at all, only experienced directly. And there are sayings that seem designed to shock, to overturn conventional piety. Jesus said, "The Pharisees and the scribes have taken the keys of knowledge and hidden them. They themselves have not entered, nor have they allowed to enter those who wish to." This is not gentle, Jesus meek and mild. This is Jesus as critic of religious authority, as revealer of hidden truth against those who would keep it hidden. Jesus said, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Here is the core Gnostic insight. Salvation lies within, in the recognition and actualization of your own divine nature, not in external observance, not in faith in doctrines, not in the mediation of priests, but in the interior work of bringing forth your true self. Jesus said, "The kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it." The kingdom is not coming in the future. It is here now, but invisible to those who have not awakened to gnosis, to direct spiritual knowledge. When scholars first read these sayings, many were disturbed. The Church of England commissioned a report in 1960 that concluded, despite the form in which it is cast, and for all its impressive indebtedness to the canonical tradition, the thought climate of the document is alien to the world of the New Testament. Alien, foreign, other, not Christianity, as understood by the tradition that survived and triumphed. But some readers found in the Gospel of Thomas something profound, something missing from the canonical Gospels. A Jesus who speaks in riddles and paradoxes, who demands inner transformation rather than external conformity, who locates the divine spark within each person rather than only in heaven or in himself alone. This was a mystical Jesus, an esoteric Jesus, a Jesus for seekers who found conventional Christianity too simple, too external, too focused on belief rather than experience. And there was another dimension to consider. The Gospel of Thomas might be very old, possibly as old as or older than the canonical Gospels. Some scholars argued that it preserved sayings from the earliest layers of the Jesus tradition, sayings that circulated orally in Syria or Palestine before the Gospels of Matthew and Luke were written. If true, this meant that the Gospel of Thomas was not a late corruption of Christianity, but rather an authentic early voice, representing a strand of interpretation that existed alongside what would become orthodoxy. This was revolutionary. For centuries, Christians had assumed that the four canonical Gospels represented the original and authentic account of Jesus' life and teaching, that everything else was later invention or distortion. But here was evidence that from the very beginning, there were multiple interpretations, multiple Christianities. The winners wrote the history and established the canon. The losers, the Gnostics and others, were written out, condemned, suppressed. Until now, the Gospel of Thomas was just one text in the library. The Gospel of Philip offered teachings on sacraments, including a mysterious rite called the bridal chamber, a spiritual marriage that conferred complete gnosis. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene portrayed Mary as a recipient of special revelations from Jesus, revelations that the male disciples, especially Peter, challenged and resented. Thunder Perfect Mind presented a female divine figure speaking in paradoxes. I am the first and the last. I am the honoured one and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. These texts revealed a diversity within early Christianity that the later church had worked hard to erase. They showed women in positions of authority, receiving visions, teaching men. They showed a Jesus concerned less with sin and redemption than with awakening and enlightenment. They showed cosmologies of stunning complexity, myths of cosmic drama, philosophies that blended Judaism, Christianity, Greek philosophy, and Egyptian mysticism into something unique. And they raised questions that would not go away. How did this happen? How did one form of Christianity triumph while others were destroyed? Was it because orthodoxy was true and Gnosticism false? Or was it simply political power, the ability of bishops to consolidate authority, to define heresy, to use persecution and later imperial backing to enforce conformity? Were the Gnostics really heretics? Or were they casualties of history, voices of a road not taken, representatives of what Christianity might have become if circumstances had been different? These questions hung in the air as scholars and popular writers began to digest the implications of the Nag Hammadi library. But there was still a deeper question, one that would emerge most powerfully in the interpretations of a philosopher named Hans Jonas. Why do these texts speak to us now? What is it about our modern situation that makes Gnosticism, ancient and strange as it is, seem somehow relevant, even urgent? You stand before an antiquities dealer, Cairo, 1948. Picture yourself in Cairo. The year is 1948. The war is over. The city hums with the energy of reconstruction, of return to normal life, though what normal means now is uncertain. The British still maintain influence, though their empire is crumbling. Egyptian nationalism is rising. In a few years, Nasser will seize power and everything will change. But for now, Cairo remains what it has always been, a crossroads, a market, a place where ancient and modern collide. You have come to an antiquities dealer's shop in the old quarter. The shop front is modest, the interior dim and cluttered, shelves lined with artifacts, Roman glass, Coptic textiles, Islamic ceramics, amulets and scarabs, and fragments of stone inscriptions. The dealer watches you with the patient eyes of a man who has learned to read customers, to assess interest and ignorance, and the delicate balance between them that determines price. On the table before you lie several papyrus leaves. They have been separated from their binding, laid out for inspection. The papyrus itself is a light golden colour, the surface smooth, the edges ragged where sheets have separated. On one side of each leaf, you see writing, not Arabic, not hieroglyphics, Coptic, Greek letters forming Egyptian words, the script of late antiquity, the language that early Christians in Egypt used for their sacred texts. You lean closer. The lamplight catches the ink, carbon black against pale gold. The writing is neat, columned, the work of a practiced scribe. Here and there, you see decorated initials, the kind of ornamentation that scribes used to mark the beginning of new sections, and at the top of one page, partially damaged but still legible, you see what might be a title, The Gospel According to Thomas. Your hands tremble slightly as you pick up the leaf. The papyrus is surprisingly sturdy, not brittle as you expected, but you handle it with care nonetheless. This paper, if you can call it that, is perhaps 16 centuries old. The person who wrote these words, who carefully formed each letter, who decorated those initials, has been dust for a millennium and a half. Yet here is the work of their hands. Here is their breath, their vision, their faith, preserved by accident of climate and the deliberate act of burial. You cannot read Coptic well. You recognize some words, fragments of meaning. You see the name Jesus repeated. You see references to light, to knowledge, to the kingdom. But the full sense eludes you. To unlock this, you would need expertise you do not possess, time you do not have, resources beyond your means. The dealer watches you. He names a price. It is substantial but not impossible. You could afford it, barely. But should you? What would you do with it? You are not a scholar. You have no connections to universities, to museums. This leaf might sit in your home, beautiful but mute, its secrets locked away. Or you could walk away, leave it for someone else. The dealer will find another buyer, perhaps someone who can translate it, publish it, share it with the world, or perhaps someone who will simply add it to a private collection, another treasure hoarded in darkness. You set the leaf down gently. Your fingerprints, you realize, are now on papyrus that has not been touched by human hands in 1600 years, except for the peasants who found it, the middlemen who sold it, the dealer who displays it now. You have become part of its chain of custody, however briefly, a link in the transmission from ancient hands to modern ones. The dealer wraps the leaves carefully in cloth. He places them back on the shelf. You thank him and step out into the Cairo street. The sounds of the modern world rush in. Car horns, shouting vendors, the call to prayer from a nearby mosque. The moment of connection to antiquity breaks. You are in the 20th century again. The eternal city flowing around you, past and present, layered so thickly that sometimes you cannot tell them apart. But the image stays with you. Those golden leaves, that careful script, the weight of centuries, the understanding that you held in your hands, words that someone thought important enough to copy, to preserve, to hide from destruction. Words that waited patiently for someone to find them again, to hear the voices they preserved. What would those voices say if you could understand them? What wisdom, what vision, what understanding of the divine and the human did they contain? And why, after so long in darkness, do they emerge now? Is it accident? Providence? or perhaps simply the working out of probabilities across vast stretches of time, the inevitable resurfacing of what was buried. You do not know. You walk through Cairo's streets, past mosques and churches, and the remnants of temples older than either, and you carry with you the knowledge that the past is not dead, not even past, that it lies just beneath the surface everywhere, waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right accident of discovery to bring it back into the light. Why the world was not ready. The Nag Hammadi library was discovered in December of 1945. That date matters. The Second World War had ended just months earlier. Hiroshima and Nagasaki lay in radioactive ruins, the mushroom cloud having introduced humanity to its power to destroy itself completely. The Holocaust had been revealed in its full horror. Europe was devastated. The old empires, British and French and Dutch, were beginning their long collapse. A new empire, American, was rising, and a new kind of war, cold and ideological, was beginning between capitalism and communism, between West and East, a war that would dominate the next 4 decades. Into this world, Gnostic texts emerged speaking of alienation, of the material world as a prison, of salvation through secret knowledge, of the divine spark trapped in matter. The timing was extraordinary, but the world was not ready to hear them. Academic theology in the 1940s and 50s was still dominated by conservative Christians who saw heresy as error to be refuted, not as an alternative worthy of study. Gnosticism was a dead end, they believed, rightly suppressed by the Church Fathers, representing a corruption of true Christianity by pagan philosophy. To take it seriously was to give credence to wrong thinking, to confuse the faithful, to muddy the clear waters of orthodox doctrine. Among secular scholars, there was also resistance, though of a different kind. Gnosticism seemed too mystical, too concerned with inner experience, too resistant to rational analysis. This was the age of existentialism, yes, but also of logical positivism, of the linguistic turn in philosophy, of movements that prized clarity and precision over symbolic ambiguity. The Gnostic texts, with their elaborate cosmologies and their insistence that ultimate truth transcends language, seemed like a throwback to pre-rational thinking. And there was something else, harder to articulate but deeply felt. The Gnostics were losers. They had lost the battle for the soul of Christianity. They had been condemned, persecuted, driven underground, their books burned, their teachers silenced. History, as everyone knew, was written by the winners. Why waste time on the losers? What could they teach us that the victors could not teach better? But beneath these intellectual objections lay something more primal: fear. Fear of relativism, of the idea that there might be many valid interpretations of Christianity rather than one true faith. Fear of mysticism, of claims to direct experience of the divine that could not be controlled by church hierarchy or academic method. Fear of the inner darkness that Gnosticism insisted must be confronted, the shadow side of existence, the cosmic evil that seemed too close for comfort in the aftermath of World War and genocide. The atomic bomb had shown humanity its capacity for evil on a scale previously unimaginable. The Holocaust had revealed depths of organized cruelty that defied comprehension. In the face of such horrors, the Gnostic insistence that the material world was created by a blind, ignorant, perhaps malicious demiurge, that the true God was distant and uninvolved in worldly affairs, that salvation required recognizing one's alienation from this world, all of this hit too close to the bone. Perhaps it was easier to reject Gnosticism as ancient nonsense than to consider that it might have diagnosed something true about the human condition, something that modernity, for all its technological progress and humanitarian ideals, had not solved. Perhaps it was easier to focus on the canonical Gospels, with their message of divine love and redemption, than to confront the Gnostic texts with their message of cosmic exile and the necessity of secret knowledge for escape. And so the texts were published slowly, grudgingly, with scholarly apparatus that emphasized their strangeness, their distance from normative Christianity. They were treated as historical curiosities, useful for understanding what early Christians rejected, but not as living voices that might have something to say to modern readers. But as the decades passed, something changed. The cold certainties of the post-war period began to crack. The Vietnam War, the counterculture, the sexual revolution, the environmental movement, the crisis in institutional religion, all of these created a hunger for alternatives, for paths not taken, for wisdom traditions outside the mainstream. Young people in particular began to explore Eastern religions, mysticism, esoteric traditions. And in this context, the Gnostics began to seem relevant again. Jung's interest gave them legitimacy among those exploring psychology and mythology. The discovery that early Christianity had been more diverse than previously thought appealed to those skeptical of institutional religion's claims to exclusive truth. The Gnostic emphasis on inner experience over external authority resonated with a generation that questioned all forms of established power. By the 1970s, when the full Nag Hammadi library was finally available in English, the cultural ground had shifted. The Gnostics were no longer just ancient heretics. They were voices of an alternative spirituality, of mysticism, of the search for hidden wisdom. They had become, in a sense, contemporary. But why? What was it about the modern world that made ancient Gnosticism seem newly relevant? A philosopher named Hans Jonas had been asking this question since the 1950s, and his answer would prove both profound and disturbing. The stranger in a strange world. Hans Jonas was born in Germany in 1903. He studied under Martin Heidegger, the great philosopher of being and existence. In the 1930s, Jonas fled Nazi Germany, eventually making his way to America, where he would spend most of his career teaching philosophy and religion. In 1958, he published The Gnostic Religion, a landmark study that did something revolutionary. It took Gnosticism seriously as philosophy, not just as heretical theology. It argued that the Gnostics had articulated a profound understanding of human existence, one that spoke across centuries to modern anxieties. In the spring of 1986, Jonas sat for an interview about the Gnostics. He was in his 80s then, a man who had lived through some of the 20th century's greatest horrors and most important intellectual movements. The interviewer asked him about the relevance of Gnosticism to modern times. Jonas leaned back in his chair and began to speak. "The theme of alienation," he said, "of the stranger in the world, makes the Gnostics a world historical event. It is one of the great alternatives in looking at the whole scheme of things and our place in it. Do we belong, or are we aliens? And if aliens, where do we come from? Where would home be? What would home be?" The interviewer pressed. "What parallels do you see between the 2nd century and now?" Jonas nodded slowly. "The climate of rebelliousness is there in the 2nd century, and it leads to very strange intellectual responses, philosophical responses. In our time, existentialism shows in some of its thinking some parallels with respect to Gnostic thinking and feeling. Certainly there are affinities to the modern situation." He continued, "We hear these voices from the beginning of the Christian era. A certain affinity. These things speak to us in a way they would not to, let us say, 18th century people. The widespread unease in the modern mind concerning this age-old question of, what is it all about? Are the concerns of the day, the pressing needs of day-to-day existence, is that all there is to it? In the general disruption in which we live, there is a kind of nihilism with which we are confronted. Not knowing what the standards are, what way to go in the world, what to expect, what to fear, where to belong, what to guard against. The feeling that everything goes is a sign that something is out of joint." The interviewer suggested, "So the Gnostics felt like outsiders." "Exactly," Jonas said, "and that we have to chart a way in the world from sources of insight which are not derived from our worldly knowledge alone." not from what science tells us about causes and effect, or politics, or what sociology says about laws of society. There is a remainder in the equations of our being that is not dissolved into these different forces and determinations. And what is this? This feeling of homelessness points to something. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Natural science tells us of an entirely value-free system of forces of which we are a part. A fraud, this neutrality, value-free, neither hostile nor friendly nor hospitable, but just plain fact. Brutal fact, in which with the forces of our reason and of our inventiveness, we try to carve out as comfortable or acceptable an existence for ourselves as we can manage. This was the heart of Jonas's argument. The Gnostics, living in the Roman Empire of the 2nd century, experienced a kind of alienation that modernity has only intensified. They looked at the world and saw a system that did not care about them, that ground on according to its own laws, indifferent to human meaning and value. The official culture, whether Roman or later Christian Orthodox, offered answers that some found unsatisfying. It said, participate, conform, find meaning in civic duty or religious observance or family life. But for those who could not or would not conform, who felt themselves fundamentally at odds with the world as it was organized, what then? The Gnostic answer was radical. This world is not your home. You are a spark of the divine trapped in matter, exiled from your true origin. The creator of this world is not the true God, but a lesser being, ignorant or malevolent. Your task is not to adjust to this world, but to awaken to your true nature, to acquire the gnosis that will allow you to escape when you die, to return to the realm of light from which you came. This vision, Jonas argued, speaks powerfully to modern people who feel that the systems we have created, technological, economic, political, have become autonomous, running according to their own logic, indifferent to human needs and values. We feel like strangers in a world of our own making. We sense that something is profoundly wrong, that we have lost our way, but we do not know how to articulate it or what to do about it. The Gnostics offered a diagnosis, if not a cure. They said, your sense of wrongness is not a personal failing. It is a cosmic truth. The world is wrong. You are right to feel alienated. Your task is not to adjust but to awaken, to remember who you really are, to prepare for the journey home. Jonas saw parallels everywhere. The existentialists, especially Heidegger and Sartre, spoke of thrownness, of finding yourself in a world you did not choose, confronting an existence that seems absurd. Kafka's novels portrayed individuals trapped in incomprehensible bureaucracies, trying and failing to find meaning or justice. The counterculture spoke of dropping out, of rejecting the system, of seeking alternative paths. All of these, Jonas suggested, were modern echoes of the ancient Gnostic theme. But he also noted a crucial difference. The Gnostics believed in a transcendent realm beyond this world, a pleroma, a fullness of being to which the divine spark within each person could return. Modern alienation often lacks this hope. We feel exiled but have no home to return to. We sense the wrongness of the world but see no alternative. We are, in a sense, Gnostics without gnosis, alienated without escape. This makes the ancient texts both more and less relevant. More, because they articulate feelings we recognize. Less, because their solution, escape from the material world to a spiritual realm, strikes many modern people as wishful thinking. We are stuck here. This is the only world we have. The environmental crisis, indeed, is partly a result of treating the material world as unimportant compared to spiritual realities. We need to care for this world, not long for another. Yet the Gnostic critique remains powerful. If this world is all there is, and if this world is structured in ways that alienate us, that make us feel like strangers, that grind on indifferent to human meaning, then what? The Gnostic answer may be escapist, but at least it is an answer. What answer does modernity offer? Jonas did not resolve this tension. He simply held it before us, inviting reflection. The Gnostics, he suggested, were not just ancient oddities. They were voices speaking to perennial human concerns that each age must address in its own way. Their texts, recovered after 16 centuries, offer not a program but a mirror. They show us ourselves, our alienation, our homelessness, our sense that something is profoundly out of joint. And they ask, what will you do about it? The poet who almost became Pope. Rome, circa 150 AD. An Egyptian poet walks through the crowded streets of the imperial capital. His name is Valentinus. He is in his 40s, well-educated, eloquent, respected by many in the Christian community. He has come from Alexandria, that extraordinary city where Greek philosophy and Jewish wisdom and Egyptian mysticism blend into something new, something that defies easy categories. In Rome, Valentinus teaches. He gathers students, he writes, and he waits. He is waiting because there is a possibility, a real possibility, that he might become the next Bishop of Rome. The position is not yet what it will become, not yet the papacy with all its authority and grandeur, but it is important. The Bishop of Rome speaks with weight. His interpretation of doctrine carries influence throughout the Christian world, and Valentinus, for all his unconventional ideas, is respected enough, orthodox enough in his public teaching, that he is being seriously considered. Imagine what would have happened if Valentinus had been chosen. Christianity might have developed along very different lines. The mystical, the experiential, the philosophical dimensions of faith might have remained central rather than being pushed to the margins. The diversity of interpretation that existed in the 2nd century might have been preserved rather than narrowed into rigid orthodoxy. Gnosticism, or something like it, might have become the mainstream rather than the heresy. But it did not happen. Another candidate was chosen. Valentinus was passed over, and according to his opponents, this rejection wounded him deeply, turned him bitter, led him to develop his elaborate Gnostic system as a kind of revenge against the church that had spurned him. Whether this is true, or simply the slander of those who came after, we cannot know. What we do know is that Valentinus did develop a system, and it was the most sophisticated, most influential form of Christian Gnosticism that would ever exist. Years later, perhaps in the 160s AD, Valentinus, or one of his close followers, wrote a text that would be buried at Nag Hammadi and rediscovered in 1945. Modern scholars call it the Gospel of Truth. It begins with a vision of the world as it appears to those who have not yet awakened to gnosis. Listen to what the poet saw: terror and disturbance, and instability and doubt and division. There were many illusions at work by means of these, and there were empty fictions, as if they were sunk in sleep and found themselves in disturbing dreams. Either there is a place to which they are fleeing, or without strength, they come from having chased after others, or they are involved in striking blows, or they are receiving blows themselves, or they have fallen from high places, or they take off into the air though they do not even have wings. Read those words again slowly. Let them sink in. This is a description of ordinary human existence as nightmare, as disturbed sleep, as violent confusion, people fleeing, chasing, striking, falling, attempting impossible things. The poet continues. Again, sometimes it is as if people were murdering them, though there is no one even pursuing them, or they themselves are killing their neighbours, for they have been stained with their blood. When those who are going through all these things wake up, they see nothing. They who are in the midst of all these disturbances, for they are nothing. Nothing. The world of ordinary experience, with all its urgencies and terrors, is nothing. It is nightmare, illusion, disturbed sleep. And the awakening, the gnosis, reveals this. Such is the way of those who have cast ignorance aside from them like sleep, not esteeming it as anything, nor do they esteem its works as solid things either. But they leave them behind like a dream in the night. The knowledge of the Father they value as the dawn. This is the way each one has acted, as though asleep at the time when he was ignorant. And this is the way he has come to knowledge, as if he had awakened. This is Valentinus's genius. He takes the human experience of alienation, of feeling that something is profoundly wrong with the world, and he gives it cosmic significance. You are not crazy for feeling this way. You are not maladjusted. You are, in fact, perceiving the truth that most people miss. The world is a nightmare. Awakening from it is possible. And that awakening is what the Gnostics called salvation. But Valentinus went further. He developed an elaborate mythological system to explain how this nightmare came to be, why we are trapped in it, and how we can escape. It is a story of cosmic drama, of divine tragedy, of fall and potential redemption. And at its heart is a figure that would become central to Gnostic thought. Sophia, wisdom herself, whose yearning and error brought the material world into being. Who was Valentinus, this poet-philosopher who almost shaped Christianity in his image? We know frustratingly little about his personal life. He was born in Egypt, probably in the Nile Delta. He was educated in Alexandria, where he studied philosophy and Christian theology. He may have been taught by a man named Theodos, who claimed to have been a student of Paul the Apostle, though this may be legend designed to give Valentinus apostolic authority. What we do know is that he was brilliant, charismatic, and deeply versed in both scripture and philosophy. He could quote the Hebrew Bible and the emerging Christian texts with ease. He could engage with Platonic philosophy, with Stoicism, with the mystery religions, and weave all of these influences into a coherent vision. His writing, if the gospel of truth is indeed his, shows a poet's sensibility, a gift for metaphor and imagery, a willingness to use language symbolically rather than literally. His students loved him. Even his opponents admitted his intelligence and persuasiveness. Tertullian, one of the church fathers who would attack Gnosticism, wrote that Valentinus was a capable man, both in intelligence and eloquence. Irenaeus, who would devote much of his life to refuting Valentinian teaching, took Valentinus seriously enough to study his system carefully before attempting to dismantle it. And the system itself, while complex and strange to modern ears, was internally consistent, philosophically sophisticated, and psychologically profound. It explained evil without blaming the highest God. It accounted for the human sense of exile and alienation. It offered a path to salvation that required neither faith in historical events nor obedience to external authorities, but rather inner knowledge, direct spiritual experience, awakening. The Valentinian school would flourish for over a century after the master's death. Valentinian teachers would spread throughout the empire, from Egypt to Gaul, from Rome to Syria. They would write commentaries on scripture, develop liturgies, create their own gospels and revelations. They would attract followers from all social classes, including wealthy patrons, educated women, and slaves seeking spiritual liberation. But in the end, they would lose. The Catholic Church, with its emphasis on apostolic succession, creedal orthodoxy, and episcopal authority, would triumph. The Valentinians would be condemned, persecuted, driven underground. Their books would be burned, and Valentinus himself, the poet who almost became pope, would be remembered primarily through the hostile accounts of his enemies. Yet here is the extraordinary thing. When Muhammad Ali broke open that jar in 1945, when the Nag Hammadi texts were finally translated and published, Valentinus spoke again. The gospel of truth, silent for 16 centuries, found readers once more, and those readers discovered that the poet's vision of the world as nightmare, of awakening as salvation, of terror and disturbance, and instability and doubt, still resonated, still described something recognizable, still offered a diagnosis, if not a cure, for the human condition. The road not taken, the Christianity that might have been, lay there in those papyrus pages. And people wondered, what if Valentinus had been chosen as bishop? What if his vision had shaped the church instead of being expelled from it? Would Christianity have been richer for its mysticism, more tolerant of diversity, more focused on inner transformation than external conformity? Or would it have collapsed into philosophical abstraction, losing the concrete historical claims and moral teachings that gave orthodox Christianity its power? We will never know. History took a different path, but the question haunts us, and Valentinus's words, recovered from the sand, invite us to imagine what was lost when the Gnostics fell silent. Thunder, perfect mind. Among the texts found at Nag Hammadi is one so strange, so powerful, so unlike anything else in ancient literature, that scholars still struggle to categorize it. It has no narrative, no theological argument, no clear Christian content. It is simply a voice speaking, a female voice, divine, and yet embodying all contradictions, claiming all opposites as her own. The text is called Thunder, Perfect Mind. I am the first and the last. I am the honoured one and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the mother and the daughter. I am the members of my mother. I am the barren one, and many are her sons. I am she whose wedding is great, and I have not taken a husband. I am the midwife, and she who does not bear. I am the solace of my labour pains. I am the bride and the bridegroom, and it is my husband who begot me. I am the mother of my father, and the sister of my husband, and he is my offspring. The voice continues, relentless, piling paradox upon paradox. I am the silence that is incomprehensible, and the idea whose remembrance is frequent. I am the voice whose sound is manifold, and the word whose appearance is multiple. I am the utterance of my name. What are we to make of this? Some scholars see it as a hymn to Sophia, wisdom personified, containing all opposites within herself, because she exists at the boundary between the divine realm and the material world. Others see it as an even more ancient figure, perhaps Isis, the Egyptian goddess who was all things to all people, or perhaps an archetype of the feminine divine that transcends any single religious tradition. What is clear is that this voice speaks with authority that brooks no argument. She is not asking for belief or worship. She is declaring what is. And what she declares is that the divine feminine contains everything, the sacred and the profane, the exalted and the degraded, the pure and the corrupt. She is beyond moral categories, beyond the dualisms that ordinary religion imposes. For I am knowledge and ignorance, I am shame and boldness, I am shameless, I am ashamed, I am strength and I am fear, I am war and peace. Give heed to me, I am the one who is disgraced, and the great one. Give heed to my poverty and my wealth. Do not be arrogant to me when I am cast out upon the earth, and you will find me in those who are to come. And do not look upon me on the dung heap, nor go and leave me cast out, and you will find me in the kingdoms. This is not the God of orthodox Christianity, transcendent, separate from creation, purely good. This is divinity that embraces the fullness of existence, that refuses to split reality into neat categories of good and evil, pure and impure, sacred and profane. And it is female, unambiguously, powerfully female. The significance of this, for understanding Gnostic communities, cannot be overstated. If the divine voice can speak in the feminine, if wisdom herself can be honoured as the first emanation of God, if the thunder, the manifestation of divine power, can be female, then women can speak with spiritual authority. They can teach, they can prophesy, they can lead, and the evidence suggests that in Gnostic circles they did. While we must be careful not to romanticize, while we must acknowledge that ancient societies, including Gnostic communities, were still patriarchal in many ways. Nevertheless, the Gnostic texts preserve a space for female authority that Orthodox Christianity increasingly denied. The voice of thunder, perfect mind, commands attention. Hear me, you hearers, and learn of my words, you who know me. I am the hearing that is attainable to everything. I am the speech that cannot be grasped. I am the name of the sound and the sound of the name. I am the sign of the letter and the designation of the division. There is something hypnotic in these declarations, something that works on the listener, not through logical argument, but through the sheer accumulation of paradoxes, the insistence that opposites meet in the divine. The text builds and builds, refusing resolution, refusing to let you rest in any single understanding. I am the one whom they call life, and you have called death. I am the one whom they call law, and you have called lawlessness. I am the one whom you have pursued, and I am the one whom you have seized. I am the one whom you have scattered, and you have gathered me together. I am the one before whom you have been ashamed, and you have been shameless to me. I am she who does not keep festival, and I am she whose festivals are many. And finally, towards the end, the voice issues both invitation and warning. You who tell the truth about me, lie about me, and you who have lied about me, tell the truth about me. You who know me, be ignorant of me, and those who have not known me, let them know me, for I am knowledge and ignorance. What is being communicated here transcends ordinary religious teaching. This is not a doctrine to be believed. It is an experience to be undergone, a shattering of ordinary categories, a glimpse of the divine as paradox, as the coincidence of opposites, as that which cannot be captured in human language or thought, but only pointed toward through the piling up of contradictions. The text ends abruptly, without conclusion or summary. But I am compassionate and I am cruel. Be on your guard. Do not hate my obedience, and do not love my self-control. In my weakness, do not forsake me, and do not be afraid of my power. Thunder, perfect mind, stands as testimony to the richness and strangeness of the Gnostic imagination, to their willingness to embrace paradox rather than resolve it, to honour the feminine divine, to speak in voices that Orthodox Christianity would silence. When this text was read aloud in a Gnostic gathering, imagine the effect. Women present would hear the divine speaking in female voice, claiming authority, demanding recognition. Men would hear a challenge to their assumptions about the nature of divinity and power. All would hear an invitation into a more complex, more ambiguous, more psychologically profound understanding of the sacred. And then the text was buried. For 16 centuries, thunder fell silent. The perfect mind was hidden in a jar, but when the seal was broken, she spoke again. And her voice, ancient and strange, still has power to disturb, to challenge, to invite us beyond our comfortable categories into the wild complexity of the divine. The Gospel of Thomas speaks. If you were to ask scholars which single text from the Nag Hammadi library has had the greatest impact, most would name the Gospel of Thomas. Not because it presents the most elaborate cosmology or the most sophisticated theology, but because it claims to preserve the actual words of Jesus, secret sayings known only to the inner circle, wisdom for those who have ears to hear. The Gospel opens with a bold declaration. These are the secret sayings which the living Jesus spoke and which Didymos Judas Thomas wrote down. And he said, "Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death." Secret sayings, the living Jesus, interpretation required, and the promise, those who understand will transcend death. Everything about this opening announces that we are in Gnostic territory, where knowledge saves, where Jesus teaches mysteries rather than preaching repentance, where understanding rather than belief is the key to eternal life. The Gospel contains 114 sayings. Some are familiar from the canonical Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Others are completely unique, and even the familiar ones often have a twist, a strangeness, that makes you question whether you really understood them the first time. Consider saying number 77. Jesus said, "It is I who am the light which is above them all. It is I who am the all. From me did the all come forth, and unto me did the all extend. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there." This is not the Jesus of the canonical Gospels, the prophet who points to God the Father, who says the kingdom of heaven is at hand. This is Jesus claiming to be the all, the totality of reality, present in wood and stone, immanent in matter itself, despite matter's imprisonment in the Demiurge's creation. This is Christ, as the divine spark present in all things, waiting to be recognized. Or consider saying number 3. Jesus said, "If those who lead you say to you, 'See, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, 'It is in the sea,' then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father. But if you will not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty. Know yourself." The ancient Greek maxim inscribed at Delphi becomes here the key to salvation. The kingdom is not coming in the future. It is not located in space. It is inside and outside, everywhere and nowhere, accessible only to those who achieve self-knowledge. And self-knowledge reveals something astonishing. You are sons of the living Father. The divine spark within you is not separate from God, but is God, trapped in matter, waiting to awaken. Some sayings are cryptic, almost to the point of unintelligibility. Saying number 11, Jesus said, "This heaven will pass away, and the one above it will pass away. The dead are not alive, and the living will not die. In the days when you consumed what is dead, you made it what is live. When you come to dwell in the light, what will you do? On the day when you were one, you became two. But when you become two, what will you do?" What does this mean? Scholars have debated for decades. Perhaps it refers to stages of spiritual development, the realization of duality, the self and the world, followed by the challenge of overcoming that duality, returning to unity while retaining consciousness. Perhaps it refers to the union of male and female, the restoration of the androgynous Adam before Eve was separated from him. Perhaps it points to something that cannot be explained in words at all, but must be experienced directly. Other sayings seem designed to shock, to overturn conventional piety. Saying number 14, Jesus said to them, "If you fast, you will give rise to sin for yourselves. And if you pray, you will be condemned. And if you give alms, you will do harm to your spirits." When you go into any land and walk about in the districts, if they receive you, eat what they will set before you, and heal the sick among them. For what goes into your mouth will not defile you, but that which issues from your mouth, it is that which will defile you. This directly contradicts Jewish law and early Christian practice. Fasting, prayer, and almsgiving were the pillars of piety. Yet here, Jesus seems to dismiss them all as potentially harmful. What matters is not external observance, but inner purity. What comes out of you, your thoughts and words, these reveal your true spiritual state. Ritual is useless unless it serves inner transformation, and there are sayings that express the Gnostic sense of alienation perfectly. Saying number 42, Jesus said, "Become passers-by." Just 2 words in Greek. Become passers-by. Do not settle in this world. Do not make your home here. Pass through. You are a stranger, an exile, moving through territory that is not your own toward a destination beyond this realm. Saying number 50 preserves what may be a Gnostic baptismal formula. Jesus said, "If they say to you, 'Where did you come from?' say to them, 'We came from the light,' the place where the light came into being on its own accord and established itself and became manifest through their image. If they say to you, 'Is it you?' Say, "We are its children, and we are the elect of the living Father." If they ask you, "What is the sign of your Father in you?" say to them, "It is movement and repose." This is the Gnostics' answer to the archons, the hostile cosmic powers that rule the spheres between Earth and the pleroma. When you die and your soul begins its ascent, the archons will challenge you, will demand to know who you are and by what authority you pass through their realm. You must have the right answers, the passwords, the signs. You must declare your origin in the light, your identity as child of the true Father, your sign of movement and repose, the dynamic stillness of one who knows. Perhaps the most famous and beautiful saying in the Gospel is number 113. His disciples said to him, "When will the kingdom come? When will the kingdom come?" Jesus said, "It will not come by waiting for it. It will not be a matter of saying, 'Here it is,' or 'There it is.' Rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it. The kingdom is here now, spread out upon the earth, invisible to those who have not awakened." This is the ultimate Gnostic paradox. Salvation is not a future event, but a present reality, accessible in this moment to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. The world is both a prison and the location of the kingdom. Matter is both the trap and the hiding place of the divine. Everything depends on perception, on gnosis, on the awakening that allows you to see what was always already there. When scholars first read the Gospel of Thomas after its publication in 1959, reactions were intense and divided. Some saw it as a window into the earliest layer of the Jesus tradition, possibly predating the canonical Gospels, preserving sayings that had circulated orally in the 1st century. Others dismissed it as a late 2nd century composition that took canonical sayings and twisted them to serve Gnostic theology. The debate continues. But what is not debatable is the power of these sayings to disturb, to provoke, to invite interpretation. They refuse easy understanding. They demand that the reader work, think, meditate, seek the hidden meaning beneath the surface. And in this refusal to be simple or straightforward, they enact the very principle they teach. Truth is not given freely but must be sought, and only those who seek diligently will find. Mary's vision and Philip's mysteries. The Gospel of Mary is fragmentary. The first 6 pages are missing. What remains begins in the middle of a scene where the risen Jesus is instructing his disciples. He tells them to preach the gospel, warns them not to lay down any rules beyond what he has given, and then departs. The disciples are grieving, afraid to preach because they fear persecution. It is Mary Magdalene who comforts them, who turns their hearts toward the good, who reminds them of the Saviour's teachings. Then Peter says to her, "Sister, we know that the Saviour loved you more than the rest of women. Tell us the words of the Saviour, which you remember, which you know but we do not, nor have we heard them." Mary agrees. She says, "I will teach you about what is hidden from you." And she proceeds to recount a vision she received, a revelation of the soul's ascent through the hostile powers, the archons, the cosmic authorities that seek to prevent the soul's return to its source. In her vision, the soul encounters each power in turn. Desire says, "I did not see you descending, but now I see you ascending. Why do you lie, since you belong to me?" The soul responds, "I saw you. You did not see me nor recognize me. I served you as a garment, and you did not know me." The soul passes desire and encounters ignorance, then wrath. Each power challenges the soul, each claims authority over it, and each is defeated by the soul's gnosis, its knowledge of its true origin and nature. The soul declares, "What binds me has been slain, and what surrounds me has been overcome, and my desire has been ended, and ignorance has died. In a world I was released from a world, and in a type from a heavenly type, and from the fetter of oblivion, which is transient. From this time on will I attain to the rest of the time, of the season, of the aeon, in silence. This is the Gnostic vision of salvation, ascent through hostile powers, claiming freedom through knowledge, attaining rest in silence beyond time. And it is Mary Magdalene who teaches this vision to the male disciples. But when she finishes speaking, Andrew responds, "Say what you wish to say about what she has said. I at least do not believe that the Saviour said this. For certainly these teachings are strange ideas." Peter agrees. Did he really speak with a woman without our knowledge, and not openly? Are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us? Mary weeps. She says to Peter, "My brother Peter, what do you think? Do you think that I have thought this up myself in my heart, or that I am lying about the Saviour?" Levi, another disciple, comes to Mary's defence. "Peter, you have always been hot-tempered. Now I see you contending against the woman like the adversaries. But if the Saviour made her worthy, who are you indeed to reject her? Surely the Saviour knows her very well. That is why he loved her more than us. Rather let us be ashamed and put on the perfect man, and acquire him for ourselves as he commanded us, and preach the gospel, not laying down any other rule or other law beyond what the Saviour said." The gospel ends there, with the disciples going forth to preach, but the conflict has been laid bare. Peter doubting Mary's authority, Mary weeping, Levi defending her right to teach. This may reflect actual tensions in early Christianity between those who accepted women's spiritual authority and those who rejected it. By the late 2nd century, when women's leadership was being systematically excluded from orthodox Christianity, the Gospel of Mary preserved an alternative memory, a claim that Jesus had taught women, had loved Mary Magdalene especially, had given her revelations not shared with men. The Gospel of Philip, another text from Nag Hammadi, also elevates Mary Magdalene. It says, "There were 3 who always walked with the Lord, Mary his mother and her sister, and Magdalene, the one who was called his companion. His sister and his mother and his companion were each a Mary. The companion of the Saviour is Mary Magdalene, but Christ loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often on her mouth. The rest of the disciples were offended by it and expressed disapproval. They said to him, 'Why do you love her more than all of us?' The kiss on the mouth was likely a ritual practice in some Gnostic communities, a sign of spiritual transmission, the passing of gnosis from teacher to student through breath and intimate contact. But it also clearly implied a special relationship between Jesus and Mary that provoked jealousy and conflict. The Gospel of Philip is less a narrative gospel than a collection of meditations on sacraments, on symbols, on the nature of reality. It is here that we find the most detailed discussion of a Gnostic ritual called the bridal chamber. The text says, "If anyone becomes a son of the bridal chamber, he will receive the light. If anyone does not receive it while he is here, he will not be able to receive it in the other place." What was the bridal chamber? Scholars debate. Some see it as a ritual marriage, either symbolic or actual, perhaps involving sexual union as a sacrament of wholeness and reunion with the divine. Others see it as a meditation practice, an inner marriage of the masculine and feminine aspects of the soul, the integration Jung would later call the union of anima and animus. The Gospel is cryptic about the details. The bridal chamber is not for the animals, nor is it for the slaves, nor for defiled women, but it is for free men and virgins. Virgins here likely does not mean sexually inexperienced, but rather whole, undivided, restored to the original androgynous state of Adam before Eve was separated. The text continues, "Great is the mystery of marriage, for without it the world would not have existed. Now the existence of the world depends on man, and the existence of man on marriage. Think of the undefiled relationship, for it possesses great power. Its image consists of a defilement of the form. Marriage, relationship, union. These are not merely social conventions in Gnostic thought, but cosmic principles. The separation of male and female mirrors, the cosmic rupture, the fall of Sophia, the splitting of the original unity. Restoration requires reunion, the bridal chamber that makes whole what was divided. The Gospel of Philip says, "When Eve was in Adam, there was no death. When she was separated from him, death came into being. If she enters into him again, and he receives her into himself, death will no longer exist." This is mythology, psychology, and soteriology all at once. The original human was undivided, whole, immortal. Division brought death, reunion brings life, and the bridal chamber is the ritual enactment of this reunion. The symbolic or actual restoration of wholeness. Orthodox Christianity would develop a very different understanding of marriage and sexuality. Marriage as a concession to human weakness, celibacy as the higher path, the body as problematic at best. But in these Gnostic texts, the body becomes a site of potential sacredness, sexuality, a path to gnosis when properly understood and ritually enacted. How literally should we take these texts? Were there actual sexual rituals in Gnostic communities? Or is all of this symbolic, pointing to interior psychological and spiritual integration? The texts themselves are ambiguous, and the ambiguity may be deliberate. What matters is the principle. That which was divided must be reunited. The masculine and feminine within and without must be brought into harmony, and this reunion, whether literal or symbolic, is the path to salvation. The man who would save Christianity from itself. Lyon, Gaul, circa 180 AD. A Christian community gathers for worship. Their bishop is a man named Irenaeus, originally from Asia Minor, but now serving this congregation far from the Mediterranean heartland of Christianity. He is in his 50s, vigorous, brilliant, utterly devoted to what he sees as the apostolic truth. And he is about to undertake a work that will shape Christianity for the next 2 millennia. Irenaeus has just returned from Rome. While there, he witnessed something that shook him deeply. His old mentor and predecessor, Pothinus, was martyred along with dozens of other Christians from Lyon. The persecution had been brutal. Christians were dragged into the arena, tortured publicly, torn apart by beasts, burned alive. Pothinus himself was over 90 years old when they killed him. The aged bishop had refused to deny Christ, had endured beatings and imprisonment, had died bearing witness to the faith. Irenaeus succeeded him as bishop, and in the aftermath of this trauma, in the grief and anger and determination to honour the martyrs, Irenaeus began to write his great work, Against Heresies, a comprehensive attack on Gnosticism in all its forms. But something else drove him beyond the grief. While in Rome, Irenaeus had discovered that the Gnostics, particularly the Valentinians, were spreading their teachings everywhere. Worse, an old friend from his student days, someone who had studied alongside him under Polycarp, had converted to Valentinian teaching. This personal betrayal stung. If even someone who had sat at the feet of the great Polycarp, who had known the Apostle John, could be seduced by Gnostic ideas, then no one was safe. Irenaeus saw the stakes clearly. Christianity was at a crossroads. Multiple interpretations competed for adherence. Multiple teachers claimed authority. In a time of persecution, when Christians might be arrested and executed at any moment, unity was essential. Confusion about doctrine was not an academic matter. It was a question of survival. If Christians could not agree on what they believed, if every teacher could offer a different interpretation, if secret knowledge trumped apostolic tradition, then the church would fragment into countless sects and vanish like mist. So Irenaeus set himself a threefold task. First, make it impossible for anyone to confuse Gnosticism with Christianity. Second, make it impossible for Gnostic teaching to survive within the church. Third, demonstrate that Gnosticism was not Christian innovation but pagan corruption, old mythology dressed in Christian language. To accomplish this, he would need to study the heretics carefully. He obtained Gnostic texts. He spoke with Gnostic teachers. He tried to understand their systems from the inside so he could refute them effectively. And to his credit, his accounts of Gnostic teaching, while hostile, are generally accurate. When the Gospel of Truth was discovered at Nag Hammadi, scholars found that Irenaeus' descriptions of Valentinian thought matched the text remarkably well. He did his homework, but his conclusions were damning. He wrote of the Valentinians, "They maintain that they have attained to a height beyond every power, and that therefore they are free in every respect to act as they please, having no one to fear in anything. For they claim that because of the redemption, they cannot be apprehended or even perceived by the judge." This was the political heart of the matter. Gnostics claimed to be beyond earthly and heavenly authority, beyond the judgment of God or the Demiurge or anyone else. They had gnosis. They were saved. What need had they for bishops, for church authority, for communal discipline? As one modern scholar put it, gnosis offers nothing less than a theological justification for refusing to obey the bishops and priests. Irenaeus saw where this led. During persecutions, when Christians were called to witness to their faith even unto death, Gnostics would slip away. They would use philosophical distinctions to avoid declaring themselves Christian. They would speak ambiguously, would claim they were being persecuted for philosophical views rather than religious ones. After all, if the body was merely a prison, if matter was evil, why sacrifice the body for the sake of witness? Better to preserve oneself, to continue teaching the elect, to let the martyrs die for their literal-minded faith. This enraged Irenaeus. Men and women he knew personally had been torn apart in the arena, while Gnostics looked on and smugly explained that such suffering was unnecessary for the truly spiritual. The martyrs had died believing they were witnessing to the truth. Were they merely foolish psychics, stuck at a lower level of understanding, while the pneumatic Gnostics transcended such crude needs? But beyond the political critique lay theological objections. Irenaeus went through the Valentinian system point by point and dismantled it. How could divine wisdom have guilty yearnings? How could the pleroma be disturbed if it was perfect? How could anything go wrong in the divine realm? If the Father was truly incomprehensible, how could Valentinus, or anyone else, describe the contents of the pleroma, the emanation of the aeons, the drama of Sophia's fall? Most seriously, the Gnostics taught that the Father of Jesus was not the same as the creator of heaven and earth. This was blasphemy. The God of the Old Testament, who made the world and called it good, was the same God whom Jesus called Father. There was no demiurge, no blind, ignorant creator separate from the true God. One God created all things. One God sent Jesus to redeem his creation. The Gnostic mythology, with its elaborate hierarchy of divine beings and its relegation of the creator to an inferior position, was pagan philosophy masquerading as Christian teaching. Irenaeus also mocked the Gnostic teachers themselves. He wrote, "If anyone yields himself to them like a little sheep and follows out their practice and their redemption, such a person becomes so puffed up that he walks with a strutting gait and a supercilious countenance, possessing the pompous air of a cock." The cock. This was a deliberate insult, but also a reference to actual Gnostic symbols. Archaeological finds have revealed charms and statues showing the body of a man with the head of a cock, often with the word abraxas inscribed, representing a being of light in which opposites of good and evil are transcended in the morally neutral realm of spirit. The cock was chosen because it greets the dawn, just as the Gnostic awakens to knowledge. Irenaeus turned this symbol of enlightenment into an image of arrogance and spiritual pride. His arguments were effective, but what really gave them power was his constructive work. He did not merely attack, he built. He articulated clearly what would become orthodox Christianity: one God, creator of all, revealed in the Old Testament and incarnate in Jesus Christ, who died for human sins and rose bodily from the dead. Salvation comes through faith in this Jesus, through baptism into the church he founded, through obedience to the bishops who stand in apostolic succession from the original 12 disciples. And crucially, Irenaeus defended the fourfold gospel. The Gnostics, he complained, possessed more gospels than there really were. Different sects favoured different texts, but Irenaeus insisted, only 4 gospels are authentic, only 4 bear apostolic authority: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These and no others. His reasoning was creative. There are 4 zones of the world, 4 winds, 4 pillars supporting creation. The cherubim have 4 faces. There were 4 covenants between God and humanity. Therefore, it is fitting that there are 4 gospels. The pillar and ground of the church is the gospel and the spirit of life. It is therefore fitting that there are 4 pillars vivifying humanity afresh. By our standards, this is weak argument, but for Irenaeus's contemporaries, symbolic reasoning carried weight, and the effect was to narrow the acceptable canon, to exclude the multitude of gospels circulating among various Christian groups, to establish a fixed set of texts that all churches should recognize as authoritative. After Irenaeus, very little mention of Gnosticism appears in Christian writing for decades. It is as if he had done his work so thoroughly that the heresy simply vanished. Of course, it did not really vanish. It went underground, survived in pockets, perhaps even flourished in places beyond the reach of episcopal authority. But as a visible challenge to orthodox Christianity, as a movement that could claim equal legitimacy, Gnosticism was finished. The battle was over. Irenaeus had won. Or had he? When the Nag Hammadi texts were discovered, when scholars could read Gnostic teachings in the Gnostics' own words, rather than through the hostile lens of the heresy hunters, a more complex picture emerged. Yes, some Gnostics were arrogant. Yes, some avoided martyrdom. Yes, their cosmology was bizarre, but they were also serious spiritual seekers. They developed sophisticated philosophies. They preserved elements of Christianity that orthodoxy would lose. And the question remained, was Irenaeus right? Did Christianity need to narrow, to consolidate, to expel the Gnostics in order to survive? Or did something precious die when diversity was replaced by conformity, when mystery was replaced by creed, when the many paths were reduced to one? Before the rupture, to understand the Gnostics, you must first understand their vision of what came before, the original state of reality before anything went wrong. The Gnostics, particularly the Valentinians and Sethians, imagined an eternal realm they called the pleroma, a Greek word meaning fullness, completeness, totality. The pleroma was not a place, not in any spatial sense, because it existed before space and time came into being. It was rather a state of being, of perfect harmony, of divine consciousness at rest in itself. At the centre, if we can speak of centres in a realm without location, dwelt the Father. But even to call this being Father is to use language inadequately. The Gnostics piled up terms, trying to capture what cannot be captured: the ineffable, the unnameable, the invisible, the unknown, the depth, the abyss, the silence. This was not the personal God of Judaism and Christianity, not the lawgiver who spoke to Moses, not the Father whom Jesus addressed in prayer. This was pure being beyond all attributes, consciousness without content, existence so transcendent that nothing could be said of it that would not immediately falsify it. And yet, it was not static. The Father possessed, as the Gnostics said, a kind of inner dynamism, not will in any purposive sense, not desire or need or lack, but simply the inherent fecundity of being itself, which naturally, inevitably, eternally projects from itself a series of archetypal realities that the Gnostics called aeons. The first projection was silence, the Father's consort, the feminine aspect of the divine dyad. Then came mind, nous in Greek, the capacity for thought and awareness. Then truth, aletheia, the unveiling of what is. These four formed the original tetrad, the fourfold ground of all subsequent emanation. From mind and truth came logos, the word, and life, Zoe. These are familiar to anyone who has read the opening of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In him was life. The Gnostics were taking biblical language and elaborating it into a metaphysical system. From logos and life came humanity, anthropos, and church, ecclesia. Not humanity as we know it, trapped in flesh, but the archetype of the human, the divine idea of human being, and church not as an institution, but as the eternal assembly of divine consciousness, the community of being itself. These 8 aeons, the Ogdode, formed the inner circle of the Pleroma. But the process did not stop there. Each pair of aeons generated further pairs, each pair slightly more removed from the original source, slightly less filled with the Father's light, until there were 30 aeons in total, arranged in a hierarchy of being, all dwelling in the Pleroma, all participating in the divine fullness, all singing hymns of praise to the Father, whose incomprehensible depth they eternally contemplated. Imagine this if you can. Not a static heaven populated by separate beings, but a dynamic, living, unified field of divine consciousness, differentiating itself into distinct principles, or powers, or moments of awareness, each one possessing its own character and function, yet all united in perfect harmony, all transparent to each other, all held in the gravitational field, so to speak, of the Father's absolute being. There was no matter here, no bodies, no space or time as we understand them. The aeons were not physical entities but thought forms, living ideas, divine energies. They were, in a sense, the contents of God's mind, the eternal patterns according to which everything that would later come into existence was structured. The Gnostics called this the realm of light, not light in the physical sense, not photons travelling through space, but the metaphorical light of consciousness, of awareness, of understanding. To be in the Pleroma was to dwell in pure lucidity, in the light of the Father's knowledge, in complete transparency of being, and there was no time. Past, present, and future did not exist because there was no change, no becoming, no movement from potentiality to actuality. Everything that the Pleroma was, it had always been and would always be. Eternity, not as endless duration, but as the simultaneous presence of all being in a single eternal now. There was no suffering in the Pleroma, no lack, no desire for what was absent, because nothing was absent. Fullness means just that. Nothing missing, nothing wanted, nothing sought. The aeons did not yearn for the Father because they already possessed him, were already filled with his presence, were already united to him in bonds that could not be broken. There was no death in the Pleroma because there was no life in the biological sense, no organisms that could grow and decay. There was only eternal being, unchanging and indestructible. There was no evil in the Pleroma, no conflict, no opposition. Each aeon had its proper place, its proper function. Each complemented the others. The masculine and feminine principles balanced perfectly. Thought and emotion, light and silence, depth and height, all the opposites that would later tear the world apart existed here in perfect synthesis, perfectly reconciled. This was paradise, but not a paradise that human beings had lost through sin. This was a paradise that had never been accessible to humans at all because humans, as embodied creatures, did not yet exist. The Pleroma was the divine realm before the fall, before the rupture, before anything went wrong. So what went wrong? How did we get from this perfect fullness to the messy, tragic, painful world we inhabit? The answer lies in one of the youngest aeons, one positioned at the very edge of the Pleroma, far from the Father's immediate presence, yet still participating in the divine nature. Her name was Sophia, wisdom, and her yearning to know what could not be known would shatter the cosmic harmony and bring the material universe into being. But before we tell that story, linger for a moment in this vision of original perfection. The Gnostics created this elaborate mythology not as abstract speculation, but as a map of spiritual reality. They were trying to understand the relationship between the transcendent God and the suffering world, between the absolute and the relative, between eternity and time. And their answer was to posit a realm of pure being that exists outside and beyond the physical cosmos, a realm to which the divine spark within each human ultimately belongs. This is consolation and challenge both. Consolation, because it means you are not ultimately of this world. Your true nature is divine. Your home is in the light. Challenge, because it means you must somehow bridge the infinite distance between where you are and where you belong, between the darkness of matter and the light of the pleroma. And that journey, the Gnostics taught, required gnosis. Knowledge not just of doctrines but of your own deepest nature, awakening to the memory of what you were before you fell into flesh. The pleroma awaits. But first, we must understand how Sophia fell, and in falling, created the world. Sophia's yearning. She was the youngest of the aeons, positioned at the outermost edge of the pleroma, furthest from the Father, yet still part of the divine fullness. Her name was Sophia, wisdom, and like all the aeons, she had been projected forth from the divine source through an eternal process of emanation. She was paired with another aeon, the fetus, desire, and together they formed the 30th and final dyad of the eternal realm. Sophia possessed the nature of wisdom, which is to question, to seek, to press beyond what is known. This quality was not a flaw. It was her essence, her particular expression of the divine. But something happened to Sophia that had never happened to any aeon before her. She conceived a passion, a yearning, a desire that went beyond her nature and her position. She wanted to know the Father directly. Understand what this means. The Father, the ineffable, the depth, was by definition unknowable, incomprehensible even to the highest aeons. Only nous, mind, the first projection from the Father, enjoyed direct knowledge of the source. This was the order of things, the hierarchy of the pleroma. Each aeon knew those above and below it in the chain of emanation, but none except nous could comprehend the Father himself. Sophia knew this. She had been taught it, had always understood it, but knowing something intellectually and accepting it spiritually are different things. And Sophia, dwelling at the edge of the pleroma, far from the Father's immediate presence, began to be troubled by a question that would not leave her. If the Father is the source of all, if he is infinite and incomprehensible, how can I be content not to know him? How can I accept this limit placed on my understanding? The question grew in her. It became an obsession, a yearning that intensified until it overwhelmed her. She resolved to do the impossible, to press beyond her position, to bypass nous, to penetrate directly to the Father himself, without consulting her consort the Letus, without seeking permission from the higher aeons. Sophia thrust herself upward, inward, toward the Father. She stretched her consciousness toward the depth, straining to comprehend what lay beyond comprehension. And in that moment, everything changed. The Father, being incomprehensible, could not be grasped. Sophia's yearning, passionate and powerful as it was, could not reach its object. But the energy of her desire did not simply dissipate. It had consequences. In attempting to know the unknowable, Sophia generated something new, something that had never existed before in the pleroma, an independent thought, a conception that arose from her passion rather than from the proper process of emanation. The Gnostic texts describe this in various ways. Some say she conceived without her consort, producing offspring through her own power alone, which violated the paired nature of emanation. Others say she desired to emulate the Father, to produce of herself as he produced the aeons, which was presumption. Still others say simply that her passion was immoderate, that it exceeded the limit proper to her nature. The result was the same. Sophia brought forth substance without form, darkness without light, incompleteness rather than fullness. The texts call it various names: the deficiency, the abortion, the shadow, the formless one. It was, in essence, ignorance given being, lack made substantial, the first thing in the cosmic order that was not fully real, not fully filled with divine light. And the pleroma was shaken. Imagine a perfectly tuned instrument suddenly struck with a dissonant chord. Imagine a placid lake disturbed by a stone cast into its depths, ripples spreading outward from the point of impact. The harmony of the aeons was disrupted. Sophia's passion had introduced something foreign into the realm of light. Anxiety, incompleteness, error. The aeon called limit, sometimes called horos or the cross, moved to contain the damage. Limit's function was to maintain boundaries, to ensure that each aeon remained in its proper place. Limit separated Sophia from her defective conception, expelled the formless thing from the pleroma into what the texts call the kenoma, the void, the empty space outside the fullness. And limit convinced Sophia that the Father was indeed incomprehensible, that her yearning was misguided, that she must accept her position and cease striving for what could not be attained. Sophia was restored to the pleroma, but she was changed. She had experienced something the other aeons had not: failure, error, the pain of unfulfilled desire. And though she was restored, a part of her remained connected to the being she had produced, the deficient thing now expelled into the void. This lower Sophia, sometimes called Achamoth, would remain outside the pleroma, suffering, yearning to return. But the immediate crisis required further action. The Father, or rather the fullness of the pleroma itself, recognizing that Sophia's passion had revealed a potential weakness in the divine order, produced two new aeons to stabilize the system: Christ and the Holy Spirit. Christ's function was to teach the aeons their proper relationship to the Father, to make clear that the Father was incomprehensible, that they should not follow Sophia's example. The Holy Spirit's function was to bring the aeons back into harmony, to restore the unity that had been threatened. The aeons learned their lesson. They sang hymns of praise and thanksgiving, and from their collective joy, from the restored harmony of the pleroma, there came forth one final projection: Jesus, or as some texts call him, the Saviour. This Jesus was different from the historical man who would later walk in Palestine. This was the aeon Jesus, the perfect fruit of the pleroma's restored harmony, destined to play a crucial role in the drama that was still unfolding. For while the pleroma was stabilized, the problem remained. What about the deficient substance that Sophia had produced? It lay outside the pleroma, in the void, formless, ignorant, suffering. And from this flawed beginning, the entire material cosmos would emerge, including the Demiurge who would rule it, the archons who would guard it, and eventually, human beings who would bear within themselves a fragment of the divine light, a spark of Sophia herself, trapped in matter, yearning to return home. The fall of Sophia was the cosmic catastrophe, the original rupture from which all our suffering flows. But it was not a fall from grace into sin, not a moral failure deserving punishment. It was an intellectual error, a passion that overreached its proper bounds, a desire to know what could not be known. And in this, the Gnostics saw something profound about the human condition. Our suffering comes not from wickedness, but from ignorance, not from rebellion, but from the impossible desire to comprehend the infinite with finite minds. Yet Sophia's error also contained within it the seed of redemption, for if the divine had not reached beyond itself, if Sophia had remained content in her place, the drama of fall and return would never have occurred. There would be no material world, yes, but there would also be no opportunity for the divine spark to know itself through struggle, to achieve gnosis through the hard journey from exile to homecoming. The story of Sophia is tragedy and promise both. In her yearning, we see ourselves. In her fall, we recognize our condition. And in the complex process by which she and her offspring will eventually be restored to the pleroma, we glimpse the possibility of our own salvation. But first, we must follow the consequences of her passion into the void, where something terrible is about to be born. Picture the moment of rupture. Close your eyes. Let the ordinary world fall away. You are going to witness something that happened before time began, in a realm where past and future do not exist. You are going to stand, in your imagination, at the boundary between eternity and time, between fullness and emptiness, between light and the first stirrings of darkness. You find yourself in the pleroma, though to say you find yourself anywhere is already wrong, because the pleroma is not a place. It is consciousness itself, infinite and luminous, stretching in all directions yet contained in a point, eternal yet somehow alive with motion. Around you, if we can speak of around, are the aeons, the divine powers, the living thoughts of God. They appear to you not as beings with forms, but as presences, as fields of awareness, as colours that are not colours, as music that is not sound. Each one distinct, yet all unified. Each one a note in a chord so perfect that to hear it would shatter your human ears. You sense mind, vast and bright, closer to the source than all others. You sense truth, clear as crystal. You sense the word and life, paired in eternal dialogue. You sense, if you reach out with the inner sense that operates here, the 30 eons arranged in their hierarchy, all oriented toward the central point that is the Father, all held in the gravitational field of absolute being. And there, at the edge, you sense her, Sophia, wisdom. She is different from the others. There is a vibration around her, a trembling, a quality of unrest. She is not content. She is questioning, and as you watch, as you feel her presence, you become aware of her yearning. It grows, it intensifies. It becomes a roar of desire that seems to fill the entire pleroma. She wants to know. She wants to reach beyond her station, beyond the limit placed on her, beyond the boundary between knowing and not knowing. She wants the Father himself, direct and unmediated, though she has been told, though she knows, that this is impossible. But knowing something is impossible does not stop desire. And Sophia's desire has reached critical mass. You feel it building, like a wave gathering height, like a spring compressed beyond its capacity. And then she moves. It is not movement in space, because there is no space. It is movement in being, a thrust of consciousness upward, inward, toward the center, toward the Father. She reaches, she strains. She pushes her awareness toward the incomprehensible one, determined to grasp what cannot be grasped. And you feel the pleroma shudder. It is subtle at first, barely perceptible, like the moment before an earthquake, when sensitive animals flee. But it grows. The perfect harmony is disturbed. The aeons sense that something is wrong. The light itself seems to flicker. If light can flicker, there is a sound, if you can call it sound, like a cosmic groan, like the fabric of reality bending under stress. Sophia has reached as far as she can reach, but the Father remains beyond comprehension. Her consciousness touches nothing, grasps nothing, finds nothing. The Father is not absent. He is present, but utterly transcendent, existing in a mode of being that even divine wisdom cannot penetrate. And in the gap between Sophia's reach and the Father's incomprehensibility, something forms. You watch in horror and fascination as from Sophia's unfulfilled yearning, from the energy of her passion meeting the wall of impossibility, a new kind of existence comes into being. It is dark where the pleroma is light. It is formless where the aeons have perfect form. It is ignorant where they possess knowledge. It is incomplete where they are full. This is the abortion, the deficiency, the shadow. And as it forms, you feel Sophia's anguish. She has produced something monstrous, something that does not belong in the pleroma, something that contains no divine light but only the absence of light. The shape of her failure, given substance. The other aeons recoil, the harmony breaks. There is confusion, fear, a sense that the eternal order has been violated. And then, moving with terrible swiftness, the aeon called limit appears. You sense his presence like a wall, like a line drawn in consciousness, like a great no spoken into the chaos. Limit separates Sophia from her offspring. He expels the dark thing, the formless thing, casting it out beyond the boundary of the pleroma into what you now realize is the void, the nothingness that lies outside the fullness, the empty space where the divine light does not shine. And there it goes, falling or rather being expelled, cast out, sent into exile. You watch as it tumbles through dimensions you cannot name, growing smaller, or perhaps growing in a different way, taking on new qualities as it moves further from the source, until finally it comes to rest in the darkness beyond the pleroma's edge. Sophia remains in the light, but she is weeping. You can feel her grief, her shame, her longing for what she has produced, even as she recognizes it must remain in exile. A part of her goes with it, you realize. A lower Sophia, an aspect of wisdom that will dwell in the darkness, suffering, yearning to return home. The light of the pleroma begins to stabilize. You sense new presences, Christ and the Holy Spirit, projected forth to restore harmony, to teach the aeons, to prevent such error from recurring. You hear, if hearing applies here, the hymns of the restored eons, songs of praise and thanksgiving that the crisis has passed. And finally, you sense one more projection. Jesus, the aeon Jesus, the perfect fruit of restored harmony, destined for some great purpose, not yet revealed. The pleroma is whole again. The rupture has been contained. But as you open your eyes, as you return to ordinary consciousness, as the vision fades and you find yourself once more in time and space and body, you carry with you the knowledge of what you have witnessed, the cosmic catastrophe, the divine error, the birth of darkness from light's overreaching. And you understand, perhaps for the first time, what the Gnostics were teaching. That the world you inhabit, the suffering you endure, the ignorance you struggle against, all of it flows from that primal moment when wisdom yearned to know what could not be known, and from her yearning produced the darkness that would become creation itself. The 39th Festal Letter. Easter, 367 AD. In Alexandria, Irenaeus, bishop of the city, sits at his writing desk, composing his annual festal letter. These letters are sent throughout Egypt to announce the date of Easter and to provide pastoral guidance to the Christian communities under his authority. Irenaeus is in his 70s now, a man who has fought theological battles his entire career, who has been exiled 5 times for his uncompromising defense of orthodoxy, who has seen emperors rise and fall, who has outlasted his enemies through sheer stubbornness and conviction. This year's letter will be remembered not for its announcement of Easter, but for what comes after, a comprehensive list of the books that Christians should accept as scripture and a stern warning against all other texts. The letter reaches the monastic community at Tabanisi, 500 miles down the Nile from Alexandria, in the spring of that year. Theodore, head of the community, is instructed to read it aloud to the assembled monks. The monastery was founded by Pachomius within living memory, established as a place where Christian ascetics could live in community rather than solitary isolation, where discipline and labour and obedience to authority would shape the spiritual life. Theodore stands before his brothers and reads, "Since we have made mention of heretics as dead, but of ourselves as possessing the divine scriptures for salvation, and since I fear lest, as Paul wrote to the Corinthians, Some few of the simple should be beguiled from their simplicity and purity by the subtlety of certain men, and should afterwards read other books, those called apocryphal, led astray by the similarity of their names with the true books. I beseech you to bear patiently if I also write. The language is careful, almost gentle, but the intent is clear. There are simple faithful who might be confused, who might pick up the wrong books, who might be led astray. Athanasius continues, and Theodore reads, "Forasmuch as some have taken in hand to reduce into order for themselves the books termed apocryphal, and to mix them up with the divinely inspired scripture, concerning which we have been fully persuaded, it hath seemed good to me also to bring before you the books included in the canon, and handed down and accredited as divine." He lists them. For the Old Testament, the familiar books of the Hebrew Bible; for the New Testament, the 4 Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, the letters of Paul, the general epistles, the Revelation of John, these and no others. Theodore reads the conclusion, "These are the fountains of salvation, that he who thirsteth may be satisfied with the words they contain. In these alone is proclaimed the doctrine of godliness. Let no man add to them, neither let him take aught from them." And then the warning, "But this is an intention of heretics, writing them to favour their own views, bestowing upon them their approbation, and assigning to them a date, and producing them as ancient writings, that thereby they might find occasion to lead astray the simple, always the simple who need protection, who cannot distinguish truth from error, who must be guided by proper authority, lest they wander into heresy." Theodore folds the letter. He looks at his brothers. Some of them, he knows, possess books that are not on Athanasius's list. Books with strange names, the Gospel of Thomas, the Secret Book of John, the Gospel of Philip, Thunder Perfect Mind. Books that claim to contain secret teachings of Jesus, hidden wisdom, mysteries not revealed to the masses. What should be done with such books? The letter does not explicitly order their destruction, but the implication is clear. These are not scripture. These are heretical inventions designed to deceive. A faithful community should have nothing to do with them. The monasteries of the Thebaid, the desert region of Upper Egypt, are not isolated outposts. They are connected by networks of communication, by travelling monks, by letters and visitors. What happens in Alexandria affects communities hundreds of miles away. And Athanasius's authority, hard won through decades of theological combat and political manoeuvring, is not to be questioned. He is the defender of orthodoxy, the champion of the Nicene Creed, the man who more than anyone else has defined what it means to be Christian in the 4th century. But in the desert, far from Alexandria's immediate reach, other impulses stir. There are monks and solitaries who have spent years reading these forbidden texts, who have copied them with their own hands, who have meditated on their teachings, who have found in them something precious. They may not understand all the elaborate mythology, they may not be committed Gnostics in any formal sense, but the texts speak to them of mysteries, of the inner life, of the journey of the soul. And now these texts are under threat, not yet with the violence that will come later, not yet with imperial backing and the power to execute heretics, but with the quiet, insidious power of ecclesiastical authority, declaring that these books have no place in Christian life. Somewhere in the region, perhaps at the monastery of Tabernisi, perhaps in one of the caves where solitaries dwell, perhaps in a small community hidden in the cliffs, someone makes a decision. These books will not be destroyed. They will be preserved. They will be hidden until a time when they can be read again without fear. The letter has been read. The canon has been declared. The fountains of salvation have been identified. But in the desert, under cliffs that have seen empires rise and fall, someone begins to plan a burial. The closing circle. The decades that follow Athanasius's letter see Christianity transformed from persecuted minority to imperial religion. In 313, Constantine had issued the Edict of Milan, granting toleration to Christians. By 380, Under Theodosius, Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. Paganism is outlawed, temples are closed, the old gods fall silent. For Gnostics and other non-orthodox Christians, this transformation is catastrophic. When Christianity was persecuted, diversity could survive in the shadows. Multiple interpretations coexisted because no single authority had the power to enforce uniformity. But when the empire becomes Christian, when bishops gain imperial backing, when heresy becomes not just theological error but also civil crime, the closing circle tightens. Edicts are issued. Books are to be burned. Teachers are to be silenced. Communities are to be disbanded. The machinery of persecution that had once been used against all Christians is now turned against those Christians who believe the wrong things, who read the wrong texts, who follow the wrong teachers. The Gnostics, never a unified movement, scatter. Some recant, publicly burning their books and affirming orthodox creeds. Some flee to remote areas beyond imperial reach, to the edges of the empire, where authority is weak and old ways persist. Some go underground, meeting in secret, preserving their teachings through oral transmission, waiting for better times. But the books remain a problem. Books can be found, confiscated, destroyed. Books are evidence of heresy, dangerous to possess, incriminating to read. And these books, the codices that communities have treasured, that scribes have laboured over, that contain the precious teachings that are now liabilities. In the cities, book burnings become regular events. Officials go house to house searching for heretical literature. Informers denounce neighbours who possess forbidden texts. The penalties are severe: confiscation of property, exile, imprisonment, sometimes death. The empire that had once killed Christians for refusing to sacrifice to pagan gods now kills Christians for reading the wrong gospels. In the monasteries, pressure builds. Bishops visit, inspecting libraries, questioning monks about their reading habits. Abbots must demonstrate loyalty to orthodox teaching. Any hint of deviation, any possession of questionable texts, can lead to disgrace, removal, dissolution of the community. The last Gnostic teachers die, not with the glory of martyrdom, not in public arenas witnessing to their faith, but quietly, forgotten, their names unrecorded. The schools close, the lineages break. The interpretations that had once been passed from teacher to student, the initiations that had transmitted gnosis, the rituals that had enacted the soul's ascent, all of this fades into silence. By the end of the 4th century, Gnostic Christianity as a visible, organised movement is finished. Oh, fragments survive, ideas persist. In the eastern reaches of the empire, in Syria and Mesopotamia, groups that share some Gnostic characteristics continue for centuries. But in Egypt, in the heartland where Valentinus had taught, where the great Gnostic schools had flourished, where the Nag Hammadi texts had been copied and read, the circle closes. The world moves on. The empire that had seemed eternal begins its long collapse. Barbarians cross the frontiers. Rome is sacked. The western provinces fall into chaos. Islam rises, sweeps across the Middle East and North Africa, transforms the religious landscape. Egypt becomes Muslim. The Coptic Church survives as a minority, holding to its orthodox tradition. Its memory of the heretics long faded. Centuries pass. The Middle Ages, the Crusades, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, the modern age. Christianity develops in ways the early church fathers could never have imagined. It splits into Catholic and Orthodox, then into thousands of Protestant denominations. It spreads to the Americas, to Africa, to Asia. It adapts, evolves, transforms. And all this time, beneath a cliff in Upper Egypt, a jar sits undisturbed. Inside it, leather-bound codices wait. The words on their pages, written in careful Coptic script, remain legible. The gold lettering still catches light, though no light reaches them. The leather has hardened but not crumbled. The papyrus has dried but not disintegrated. The Gnostics are silent. Their teachers are forgotten. Their cosmology is unknown. Their critique of the Demiurge unheard, but their words remain, patient as stone, waiting for the moment when the seal will break and they will speak again. Someone buries the books with love. Night has fallen on the Thebaid. The cliffs of Jabal al-Tarif cast long shadows in the moonlight. A figure moves carefully through the darkness, carrying something heavy wrapped in cloth. This is not theft. This is preservation. This is an act of love. We do not know who this person was. The texts do not tell us. History has erased their name. But we can imagine, perhaps a monk from the monastery at Pachomius, someone who has spent years copying these texts, who knows their contents by heart, who has meditated on their mysteries. Perhaps a solitary ascetic, one of those who lives in the caves, who has resisted the call to community life, who treasures these books as companions in the wilderness. Or perhaps someone simpler, a Christian who cannot read well but who knows these books are precious, who has heard them read aloud at gatherings, who has felt their power even without fully understanding them. Someone who knows only that these words matter, that they must not be lost, that future generations should have the chance to hear what is written here. Whoever they are, they have made a plan. In recent weeks, perhaps months, they have gathered the codices from wherever they were scattered. 13 leather-bound books, some large, some small, containing 52 separate texts. They have wrapped each one carefully in cloth and old papyrus, protecting the bindings, cushioning the pages. They have found a jar, the kind used for storing grain or oil, large enough to hold the entire collection. Now, in darkness, they come to this place beneath the cliff. They have chosen carefully, not too close to the paths where people walk, not in the monastery grounds where someone might dig, but not too far either, not in the deep desert where the jar might never be found. Here, near a large boulder at the base of the cliff, near Hammadi, but far enough from the village to be safe, they set the jar down gently. They arrange the codices inside, fitting them together like pieces of a puzzle, making sure each one is secure, protected from movement and moisture. The Gospel of Thomas goes in, the secret sayings wrapped in darkness, the secret book of John, with its elaborate cosmology of aeons and archons, the Gospel of Philip, with its mysteries of the bridal chamber, thunder-perfect mind, with her paradoxical declarations, the Gospel of Truth with its vision of the world as nightmare, all of them, one by one, placed in the jar with hands that tremble slightly, not from cold or fear but from the weight of what is being done. When all the codices are inside, they seal the jar, not with wax or pitch, which might decay, but with a simple stopper, tight enough to keep out sand and moisture, loose enough that when the time comes, when someone finds this jar, it can be opened without destroying what is inside. Now comes the digging. The sand and loose soil come away easily. The hole deepens. Sweat runs despite the cool night air. This is hard work, harder than it seemed when planning it. But the work is good. There is something right about this physical labour, this care for the books, this embodiment of hope. The jar fits perfectly into the hole. It sits level, stable, ready for the centuries of waiting ahead. Now the soil goes back in, covering the jar, hiding it from sight. Hands smooth the surface, scatter stones to make the spot look undisturbed. Someone walking past would see nothing unusual. Just the cliff, the boulder, the desert. The figure steps back, breathing hard. They look at the place where the jar is buried. For a moment, grief and hope war in their chest. These books have been companions, sources of wisdom, windows into mysteries. To bury them feels like burying friends. But what choice is there? To keep them is to risk their destruction. To hide them is to give them a chance. And so, standing in moonlight beneath ancient cliffs, this unknown person does something that will echo across 16 centuries. They pray, perhaps aloud, perhaps in silence, perhaps in formal words, perhaps in the language of the heart. But the prayer is real, and it goes something like this. Father of light, you who dwell beyond the Demiurge, beyond the archons, beyond all the powers that rule this world, receive this offering. These books contain wisdom, the gnosis that awakens the soul, the knowledge that sets free. I hide them not from you, but from those who would destroy them out of fear and ignorance. May they rest here in peace. May the sand cover them, and the years pass over them like water. And may there come a day, in a time I will not see, when someone finds them again. May that person have eyes to see and ears to hear. May these words speak again when the world is ready. Until then, may they wait in silence, patient as you are patient, eternal as you are eternal. The prayer ends. The figure turns away from the burial site. They walk back toward the monastery, or the cave, or the village, back to a life that will go on without these books, back to a world where the Gnostics are being erased from memory. They look back once, just once, fixing the location in their mind, perhaps thinking they will return someday, retrieve the books when it is safe again. But they will not return. No one will return for over 1600 years. The location will be forgotten. The person who buried the books will die, taking the secret with them. The monastery will crumble. The monks will scatter. Islam will come. Christianity will recede. Empires will fall. And the jar will sit undisturbed in the earth, exactly where loving hands placed it, waiting with infinite patience for Muhammad Ali al-Samman to drive his mattock into the sand in December of 1945. But that moment is still centuries away. For now, there is only the cliff in moonlight, the freshly smoothed earth, and the retreating figure walking away, carrying the weight of what has been done, the sorrow of burial and the hope of resurrection held together in a single heart. 1700 years of silence. The cliff does not change. Limestone, laid down in ancient seas, compressed over millions of years, thrust up by tectonic forces, eroded by wind and rare rain. The face of the rock shifts imperceptibly as sand blasts against it, as pieces fall, as the soft stone yields to time. But these are changes measured in millennia, invisible to any single human lifetime. The jar sits in its earthen bed. Darkness surrounds it, complete and absolute. No light has reached it since the moment it was covered. The leather covers of the codices harden further in the dry air. The papyrus pages, already ancient when they were buried, become more ancient still, but the dryness preserves. In the desert, in the shade of the cliff, away from moisture and insects and the decay that consumes all things elsewhere, the texts wait. Above ground, the world spins through its seasons. Winter brings cool days and cold nights. Spring passes quickly. Summer heat becomes fierce, the rocks radiating warmth long after sunset. Autumn brings dust storms, walls of sand that scour the landscape. And winter comes again. The cycle repeats. Years accumulate like sand. Stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. Constellations the buried monks knew by name, signs they read in their night vigils, lights that guided travellers and mark the seasons. The stars do not change, not in human time. They shine on an Egypt that transforms beneath them. Islam comes to the Nile Valley in the 7th century. The Byzantine Empire retreats. The Coptic Church survives but diminishes. Arabic replaces Greek as the language of learning. Monasteries adapt or disappear. The memory of Pachomius grows distant, mythical. The theological battles of the 4th century fade into history. The passions that drove them incomprehensible to new generations. The Crusades come and go. European armies marching to Jerusalem, passing through Egypt, leaving blood and chaos in their wake. Saladin rises, defeats them, establishes new dynasties. The Mamluks take power, rule from Cairo, build mosques and madrasas. The world of Mediterranean late antiquity, The world in which the Gnostics flourished and fell is gone, replaced by something entirely different. Centuries pass. The Black Death sweeps across the known world. Constantinople falls. The Renaissance flowers in Italy. The printing press is invented. The Reformation splits Western Christianity. The Enlightenment questions all traditions. The French Revolution proclaims reason. Napoleon invades Egypt, brings scholars to study hieroglyphics, awakens European interest in ancient civilizations. The 19th century sees Egypt change again. Muhammad Ali modernizes the country. The Suez Canal is cut. European powers compete for influence. Archaeology becomes a science. Tombs are opened. Temples are excavated. Papyri are discovered, bought, sold, studied. Museums in London and Paris and Berlin fill with Egyptian treasures. But beneath the cliff at Jabal al-Tarif, the jar remains undiscovered. Peasants dig for sabak in the vicinity, have dug there for centuries, perhaps have come within meters of the jar without knowing it. But the boulder marks no treasure. The location is unremarkable, and luck or providence keeps the jar hidden. The 20th century arrives. Wars in Europe, far from Egypt but touching it nonetheless. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire, British protectorate, then independence. King Farouk on the throne. The Second World War spreading chaos across North Africa. El Alamein, where armies fight among ancient ruins. And finally, 1945, the war ending, 2 atomic bombs falling on Japan. The world changed forever. And in December of that year, on a morning that begins like countless mornings before it, the long silence ends. A mattock strikes earth. A jar is revealed. The seal is broken. But before we return to that moment, linger here in the silence. 1700 years. Approximately 600,000 days. Over 14 million hours. Time beyond human comprehension. Time in which empires rise and fall. In which languages die and are born. In which the world transforms beyond recognition. And through it all, the words wait. These are the secret sayings which the living Jesus spoke. I am the first and the last. Split a piece of wood, and I am. There. The kingdom is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it. The words do not decay. They do not forget themselves. They simply are, patient and still, darkness holding them in safekeeping until light finds them again. The cliff does not care. The stars do not notice. But somewhere in the great turning of things, in the vast pattern that the Gnostics believed ordered reality, the moment is approaching when what was hidden will be revealed, when what was buried will rise, when the silence will break and ancient voices will speak again into a world that has forgotten them, but somehow, mysteriously, still needs what they have to say. The cycle completes. December 1945. Muhammad Ali al-Samman raises his mattock and brings it down on the jar. The ceramic shatters. For a moment, he steps back, half expecting jinn, but there are only books, leather and papyrus, and gold lettering catching the sun. We have been here before, at the beginning of our journey, but now we understand what Muhammad could not. What these books are, where they came from, why they were hidden. Now we can see the moment differently, can feel its weight, its significance, its completion of a circle that began 16 centuries earlier, beneath this same cliff. Someone buried these books with love, with prayer, with hope that they would be found again, that prayer is answered now, though not in any way the person who buried them could have imagined. Not by a Christian seeking wisdom, not by a monk preserving tradition, but by a Muslim farmer digging for fertilizer, a man who cannot read Coptic, who has recently killed another man in a blood feud, who thinks these books might be worth a few pounds. But does it matter? The books are found, the seal is broken, the long concealment ends. What happens next? The scattering and near loss, the academic battles, Jung's intervention, the slow process of translation and publication. All of this we have already witnessed. But see it now with new eyes, understanding it as the working out of an ancient prayer, the unfolding of a pattern that began when loving hands placed these codices in a jar and covered them with earth. The person who buried the books could not have known about Islam, about the transformation of Egypt, about the modern world. They could not have imagined cameras and universities and psychologists interested in ancient heresies. They could not have conceived of English translations appearing in bookstores thousands of miles from the Nile, but they knew something essential, that truth preserved in darkness can return to light, that words carefully protected can speak again, that what seems lost may only be waiting. And so when Muhammad's mattock breaks the jar, when his rough hands gather the codices, when his mother burns some for fuel and others are sold for trivial sums, even in this chaos, even in this near disaster, the pattern holds. The books that need to survive do survive. They find their way, through all the confusion, to the people who will recognize their value. Jung receives his codex at the exact moment he is ready for it. Scholars who have devoted their lives to understanding Gnosticism suddenly have primary sources. The world of the 1950s, 60s and 70s, hungry for alternatives to conventional religion, finds in these texts exactly the alternative they seek. It is as if the books themselves have agency, as if they know when and how to emerge, as if the long burial was not imprisonment but gestation, time needed for the world to be ready to receive what they contain. In the 4th century, these books were dangerous, their teachings unacceptable, their vision too radical. But in the 20th century, after wars and genocides and atomic bombs, after the collapse of certainties and the rise of existential anxiety, the Gnostic diagnosis of the world as nightmare, of salvation as awakening, suddenly makes sense. The cycle completes. From burial to discovery, from ancient hands to modern ones, from the moment someone prayed, "May these wait in peace," to the moment Muhammad's mattock struck earth, the arc bends toward revelation. What was hidden is revealed. What was silent speaks. What was buried rises. And standing here at this moment, understanding both the end and the beginning, we can ask, was it worth it? The persecution that drove these books underground, the long centuries of silence, the near loss in modern times, the decades before they were fully published. Could the Gnostics have survived if Constantine had never converted? If Christianity had remained diverse? If the consolidation under bishops had never occurred? Perhaps, perhaps not. We cannot know what might have been. We can only understand what is, that the Gnostic voice, suppressed but not destroyed, speaks again. That the questions they raised about the nature of God, the problem of evil, the alienation of the human spirit, remain urgent. That their answer, strange and mythological as it is, still resonates with those who feel like strangers in the world. The circle is complete. But circles, by their nature, have no end. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi library is both an ending and a beginning, both the answer to an ancient prayer and the opening of new questions. What do these texts mean for us? What do they tell us about the roads not taken, the possibilities foreclosed, the diversity that might have been, and most pressingly, do they have anything to teach us about how to live in a world that still feels, to many, like the nightmare from which we long to awaken, the questions that will not die? Carl Gustav Jung died in 1961 at his home by Lake Bollingen. He was 85 years old. In his final years, he had studied the Jung Codex intensively, had written about it, had found in the Gnostic texts confirmation of ideas he had been developing for decades. The unconscious mind, Jung believed, was not merely a repository of repressed memories, but a realm of archetypes, of patterns and symbols that recur across cultures, of a collective dimension that connects all human psyches. The Gnostic pleroma, he suggested, was one way of symbolizing this collective unconscious. The aeons were archetypes. the divine powers that structure human experience. Sophia's fall represented the ego's separation from the unconscious, the painful birth of individual consciousness. The Demiurge was the ego inflated, believing itself to be the whole of reality, unaware of the greater depths from which it arose. And the divine spark, the pneuma trapped in matter, was the self, the center of the total personality that most people never encounter, living their entire lives in the ego's limited world. In this reading, Gnosticism was not ancient mythology to be dismissed, but rather profound psychology expressed in mythological language. The Gnostics had intuited truths about the human psyche that modern psychology was only beginning to articulate. Their goal of gnosis, of awakening to one's true nature, paralleled Jung's goal of individuation, the integration of conscious and unconscious into a whole self. Jung's interpretation gave Gnosticism new legitimacy, but it also transformed it, made it psychological rather than metaphysical, turned cosmic drama into interior process. Were the Gnostics really proto-psychologists, or was Jung reading his own ideas back into ancient texts? The question remains debated. What is not debatable is the impact of the Nag Hammadi discovery on religious studies, on the understanding of early Christianity, on popular spirituality. The text proved that early Christianity was far more diverse than previously understood. Before the canon was fixed, before orthodoxy hardened, many interpretations competed. Some emphasized faith, others knowledge. Some focused on the historical Jesus, others on the cosmic Christ. Some accepted the Jewish God as creator, others saw him as a lesser being. And the losers in this competition were not necessarily wrong, they were simply defeated. History is written by the victors, and Christian history had been written by those who expelled the Gnostics. But now, the Gnostics could write their own history, could speak in their own voice, could present their case to modern audiences without the filter of hostile church fathers. Professor Hans Jonas, who had been developing his interpretation of Gnosticism since the 1930s, saw the Nag Hammadi texts as validation. The theme of alienation that he had identified in his study of church father accounts appeared even more clearly in the primary sources. The Gnostic experience of being a stranger in the world, of not belonging, of yearning for a home beyond this realm, spoke directly to modern experience. Jonas argued that after the collapse of traditional communities, after the rise of massive bureaucratic states, after industrialization and urbanization had uprooted people from the land and from organic social bonds, modern humans experienced a kind of cosmic homelessness similar to what the Gnostics had felt in the Roman Empire. We are strangers in a world we have created, alienated from nature, from each other, from ourselves. The Gnostic solution, escape to a transcendent realm, may not work for modern secular people, but the Gnostic diagnosis remains powerful. Something is wrong. The world is not as it should be. We do not belong here. These feelings are not personal failings, but responses to actual conditions, to systems that have become autonomous, that run according to their own logic, indifferent to human meaning and value. And there are other dimensions of relevance that have emerged more recently. The environmental crisis, the destruction of the natural world by industrial civilization, can be read as a Gnostic moment. If we treat the material world as a prison, as something to be transcended rather than cherished, we give ourselves permission to exploit and destroy it. The Gnostic contempt for matter may have contributed to Western Christianity's failure to develop a robust environmental ethic. But read another way. The Gnostic critique of the Demiurge could apply to the economic and technological systems that are devouring the biosphere. These systems claim to be natural, inevitable, the only possible way to organize society, but they are creations, flawed and blind like the Demiurge, treating the world as resource to be extracted, unaware of the greater whole they damage. The feminist movement has also found resources in the Gnostic texts, the prominence of female divine figures like Sophia, the evidence for women, teachers, and prophets in Gnostic communities, the Gospel of Mary's portrayal of Mary Magdalene as authoritative teacher, all of this challenges the patriarchal structures of orthodox Christianity and suggests that alternatives existed in the early church. Of course, we must be careful not to romanticize. Gnostic communities were still products of their time, still shaped by patriarchal assumptions, but they opened space for female authority that orthodoxy increasingly closed. And texts like Thunder, Perfect Mind, with their celebration of the divine feminine in all its paradoxical fullness, remain powerful resources for reimagining gender and divinity. The question of evil, the theodicy problem that the Gnostics addressed, has not gone away. After Auschwitz, after Hiroshima, after Rwanda and Srebrenica, and countless other horrors, the question, how can a good God allow such suffering, becomes more acute. The orthodox answer, that evil results from human free will, and that God will ultimately redeem all suffering, satisfies some, but others find the Gnostic answer more honest. This world is fundamentally flawed, evil is built into its structure, and expecting the Creator to fix it is futile, because the Creator is himself blind and limited. This is dark theology, arguably too dark for most people to live with, but it has the virtue of not requiring us to believe that genocides and cancers and natural disasters are all part of God's mysterious plan. The Gnostic God, the true God beyond the Demiurge, did not create this world and is not responsible for its horrors. Salvation lies not in God fixing the world, but in our escape from it, our return to the realm of light. Can such a vision sustain ethical action? The orthodox critique was that Gnostic otherworldliness led to passivity, or worse, to the belief that since matter is evil anyway, how you treat the material world and material bodies does not matter. Some Gnostics may have fallen into this trap, but others clearly believed that recognizing the divine spark in oneself required recognizing it in others, that gnosis brought compassion, that awakening meant seeing through the illusions that divide us. The New Age movement has embraced elements of Gnosticism, sometimes superficially, sometimes more deeply, the idea that we are divine beings who have forgotten our true nature, that salvation comes through awakening rather than belief, that hidden wisdom exists for those who seek. All of this resonates with New Age spirituality. Whether this is a valid continuation of the Gnostic tradition or a distortion of it remains debated. What is clear is that the Gnostic voice, silenced for 16 centuries, has returned and will not be silenced again. The texts are published, translated into dozens of languages, available to anyone with internet access. Scholars continue to study them, debate their meanings, trace their influences. Popular writers continue to find in them resources for critique and inspiration. The questions the Gnostics asked remain urgent. Who are we? Where do we come from? Why are we here? Why is there suffering? Elosi, how can we be saved? The answers they gave may not be our answers, but the questions themselves, and the seriousness with which the Gnostics pursued them, deserve our attention. Perhaps what we need from the Gnostics is not their cosmology but their courage. The courage to question everything, to reject easy answers, to sit with the darkness of the world without denying it or explaining it away. The courage to claim that we are more than what the systems of power tell us we are, that there is a spark of something sacred within each person, that awakening is possible. The Gnostics lost the historical battle, but their questions won. They have outlived the empire that persecuted them, outlived the church that expelled them, outlived the certainties of the age that buried their books. And in our uncertain age, when old certainties crumble and new ones fail to emerge, the Gnostic questions echo with renewed force. Are we strangers in this world? Where would home be? And how do we find our way back? Whispers in museums and libraries. The codices rest now behind glass, in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, in climate-controlled cases that protect them from the humidity and pollution of the modern city. Tourists pass by, pause to read the labels, take photographs, move on. Most do not linger. Ancient books, however historically important, cannot compete with the visual drama of pharaonic treasures in other museums. But some visitors stop longer. Students of early Christianity, scholars of Gnosticism, seekers of alternative spiritualities, they lean close to the glass, study the pages on display, try to make out the Coptic letters, imagine the hands that wrote them. The leather is dark and hard, the papyrus golden brown, the ink still remarkably black. These are beautiful objects, carefully made, treasured by their owners. In libraries around the world, translations of the Nag Hammadi texts sit on shelves. The massive scholarly edition published by Brill, with extensive notes and commentary. Popular editions in paperback, marketed to general readers. Specialized studies of individual texts, comparative analyses, theological responses, hundreds of books about books, layers of interpretation built on the foundation of those original papyrus pages. Graduate students write dissertations on minute points of Gnostic cosmology. Professors debate the dating of texts, the relationship between different schools, the influence of Platonic philosophy, the role of women, the meaning of obscure passages. The academic industry grinds on, producing knowledge, filling journals, hosting conferences. But something else happens too, quieter and harder to track. People pick up the Gospel of Thomas, read the sayings, find something that speaks to them. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. They copy the saying into journals, share it on social media, discuss it in study groups. The text, 2,000 years old, enters contemporary discourse, begins to shape how people think about themselves and the world. Artists draw on Gnostic imagery. Musicians write songs inspired by Sophia's fall. Filmmakers explore Gnostic themes of reality as illusion, of awakening from sleep. The Matrix trilogy draws explicitly on Gnostic mythology. The world as prison, escape as awakening, the revelation that everything you thought was real is actually a constructed illusion. Philip K. Dick, the science fiction writer, had an experience in 1974 that he believed was a direct encounter with the divine. He spent the rest of his life trying to understand it, writing millions of words in journals, exploring the possibility that he had received gnosis, that he had briefly glimpsed the true reality behind the illusion. His novels grapple with Gnostic themes. What is real? Who is the creator of this world? How do we escape? These are not academic questions for Dick. They are existential urgencies. And for many readers, his books open doorways to Gnostic ways of thinking, make the ancient cosmology relevant to contemporary experience of reality, as fundamentally uncertain, as possibly illusory, as controlled by powers we do not fully understand. In seminary libraries, students training for ministry encounter the Nag Hammadi texts and find their assumptions challenged. The early church was more diverse than they were taught. Alternatives to orthodoxy existed, were taken seriously by intelligent, devout people. This knowledge can be disturbing or liberating, depending on the student's temperament and theology. Some conclude that the church made the right choice in expelling Gnosticism, that the diversity of the 2nd century would have led to chaos, that consolidation under episcopal authority was necessary for Christianity to survive and spread. Others wonder about roads not taken, about what might have been lost, about whether Christianity would be richer today if it had retained more of its original diversity. And in meditation centers and spiritual communities of various kinds, people work with Gnostic texts as spiritual practice. They use Sophia's myth to explore their own experiences of yearning and error. They visualize the ascent through the archontic spheres as a map of psychological integration. They recite sayings from Thomas as koans, riddles designed to break through ordinary thinking and provoke direct insight. The conversation continues, not with the passion of the 2nd century, when these ideas were new and revolutionary and dangerous, but with the persistence of questions that do not have easy answers, of mysteries that remain mysterious, of the human need to understand our place in the cosmos and the possibility of transcendence. Late at night, in university libraries, someone pulls the Nag Hammadi library off the shelf, settles into a chair, begins to read the Gospel of Truth, the Secret Book of John, Thunder Perfect Mind. The words bridge 17 centuries without effort. The concerns are ancient, but also eternal. The cosmology is strange, but the questions are familiar. And sometimes, reading these texts in solitude, that person feels something shift, a recognition, a resonance, a sense that whoever wrote these words understood something about existence that we have forgotten, that we need to remember. Not the elaborate mythology necessarily, not the aeons and archons and demiurges, but the core insight that we are more than we seem, that we do not belong here, that awakening is possible. The museum closes. The library grows quiet, but the whispers continue, ancient voices speaking to modern ears. The conversation between past and present never quite ending, the questions posed in the 2nd century, still waiting for answers in the 21st. The divine spark. What did the Gnostics really discover? Behind all the mythology, beneath all the elaborate cosmology, at the heart of their vision, what is the essential insight? Perhaps this, that there is something within each person that is not of this world, that precedes all the conditioning and programming and limitation, that remains untouched by trauma and time. The divine spark, they called it. The pneuma, the seed of light, the fragment of the pleroma trapped in matter, yearning to return home. Is this literally true? Do we actually contain a piece of transcendent divinity? Or is this a metaphor for something else, something that psychological language might better capture? The Gnostics would not have cared much for this distinction. For them, mythology and psychology were not separate domains. The cosmic drama of Sophia's fall was simultaneously an interior process, something that happens in every soul. The archons were both literal cosmic powers and internal forces, the complexes and compulsions that keep us trapped in unconsciousness. The pleroma was both a real, transcendent realm and the depths of human consciousness, the ground of being that we access in moments of awakening. What they insisted on was this: you are not only what you appear to be. Beneath the ego, beneath the social roles, beneath all the identifications and definitions, there is something else, something that cannot be captured or controlled or destroyed. To know this is gnosis. To forget it is ignorance. And ignorance is not merely lack of information, but the root of all suffering. This teaching can be heard in other traditions. Hinduism speaks of the Atman, the true self that is identical with Brahman, the ultimate reality. Buddhism speaks of Buddha nature, the potential for awakening that exists in all beings. Sufism speaks of the divine spark hidden in the heart. Jewish mysticism speaks of the holy spark scattered in creation, waiting to be gathered and returned. The Gnostics were not unique in teaching that the divine dwells within, but they were unique in combining this teaching with a radical critique of the material world and its creator. Most mystical traditions say that the world is ultimately good, that it reflects divine wisdom, that the goal is to realize the unity of self and cosmos. And so, the Gnostics said, no, the world is a prison, its creator is blind, and salvation means escape. This pessimistic dualism is Gnosticism's most controversial legacy. It has been blamed for encouraging world denial, for justifying neglect of material needs and social responsibilities, for creating an elite spirituality that divides humanity into those who have the spark and those who do not. But perhaps the Gnostic vision is not world denial, but world critique. Perhaps what they saw clearly was that the systems humans create, the structures of power and control, the ideologies that claim to represent ultimate reality are all creations of the Demiurge, products of ignorance posing as wisdom. And perhaps their call to remember the divine spark was not a call to flee the world, but to resist being reduced to what the world says we are. In this reading, Gnosticism becomes radical humanism. Every person contains something that transcends all social categories, all labels, all attempts at definition and control. The pneuma within cannot be measured, quantified, commodified, or owned. It exists prior to all the structures that shape human life, and it will outlast them all. To recognize the spark in yourself is to recognize it in others. It is to see through the illusions that divide humanity into masters and slaves, saved and damned, worthy and worthless. It is to understand that beneath all the differences, there is a commonality, a shared exile, a universal yearning for home. This does not solve the problem of evil. It does not tell us how to build a better world. It does not provide a political program or an ethical system. What it offers is perspective, a way of seeing that relativizes all worldly claims to absolute authority, that insists there is always more than what appears, always depths beyond the surface. The spark is patient. It has waited through 16 centuries of burial. It waits now in each person who reads these words, whether they believe the Gnostic mythology or not, whether they identify as spiritual or secular, whether they seek awakening, or simply try to survive in a difficult world. The spark does not demand, it does not threaten, it simply is, there in the depths. The part of you that has never been lost, that knows the way home even when the conscious mind is completely confused. All the Gnostics taught was this: remember. Remember what you are beneath what you have become. Remember where you came from before you were born into this world. Remember that you are light, temporarily clothed in darkness, but light nonetheless. Is this true? Each person must answer for themselves. But the fact that this teaching has survived, has returned after millennia of suppression, has spoken to generation after generation across vast cultural differences, suggests that it touches something real in human experience, something that cannot be permanently forgotten or destroyed. The divine spark, the seed of light, the stranger within, who knows this is not home. Whatever name we give it, something in us recognizes the teaching, and perhaps that recognition is itself the beginning of gnosis, the ascent home. Picture one final scene, not historical this time, not the burial or discovery of texts, not the debates of ancient teachers. This is the vision the Gnostics held before them, the destination toward which all their teaching pointed, the fulfillment of the divine spark's yearning. You have died. Your body lies behind you, the clothing you wore in the material world shed like an old garment. Your consciousness, freed from flesh, begins to rise. You are ascending through the spheres, passing through the domains of the archons, the cosmic rulers who have held you captive through lifetime after lifetime, who have kept you imprisoned in matter through the laws of fate and necessity. The first archon appears. He challenges you. Who are you? Where do you think you are going? This is my domain. You belong to me, but you have the gnosis. You know the passwords, the secret names, the signs that grant passage. You declare, I am a child of light, descended from the pleroma, returning to my source. You have no power over me. And you pass through 7 spheres, 7 challenges. Each archon seeks to turn you back, to claim authority over you, to convince you that you belong in the realm of matter and time. But at each gate, your knowledge sets you free. The bonds of fate loosen, the chains of necessity fall away. You rise higher, leaving behind the world of becoming, approaching the realm of pure being. You pass the outermost sphere, the boundary of the material cosmos. Before you stretches the vast emptiness between the world and the pleroma, the void into which Sophia was cast when she fell. But you are not falling, you are rising. And as you rise, you feel the weight of all your lifetimes dissolving, all the karma and suffering and ignorance burning away like mist before the sun. Ahead, growing brighter as you approach, you see the light of the pleroma, not light as the material world knows it, not photons and wavelengths, but the light of consciousness itself, pure awareness without object. the radiance of being that needs no external source because it is its own source. You approach the boundary, the limit that once expelled Sophia's deficiency, but now opens to receive the returning spark, and you understand, in a flash of recognition, that you have been here before, that this is not a place you are reaching for the first time, but your original home, the realm from which you descended, the fullness to which you always belonged, even when you seem to be lost in matter. The pleroma receives you, not with fanfare or celebration, because there was never any real separation, never any actual exile. The fall was a dream from which you are now awakening. The suffering was a nightmare whose terrors dissolve in the dawn, and what remains is simply what always was. Consciousness resting in itself, being at home in being, the spark reunited with the flame. You are not absorbed, not lost in some undifferentiated unity. You retain your awareness, your identity, but now that identity is revealed as always having been divine, you were never really a separate being. You were always an expression of the Father, an aeon among aeons, a wave that never ceased being ocean, even when it seemed to be individual and alone. Around you, you sense the presence of all the other sparks that have returned, all the pneumatics who achieved gnosis and made the ascent, all the seeds of light that were scattered in creation and are now gathered home. And you sense Sophia herself, no longer divided, no longer suffering, restored to her place in the eternal harmony, her error forgiven, or rather understood as necessary, as part of the great drama by which the divine comes to know itself through the experience of fall and return. There is no time here. The entire drama of creation and salvation, the descent of the sparks and their return, happens in an eternal now. You have always been here. You never left. The journey was a dream, and you are awake now, home at last in the light that never dims. This is the Gnostic promise, not immortality in the sense of endless duration, not heaven as a place of reward, not even resurrection in the sense of restored bodies, but reunion with the source, recognition of what you always were, the end of exile, and the peace of homecoming. Is it true? Does consciousness survive death? Do we ascend through cosmic spheres back to a transcendent source? The Gnostics could not prove it. They offered their mythology as vision, as revelation, as gnosis received through spiritual experience, rather than demonstrated through logical argument. But whether literally true or symbolically powerful, the vision holds something essential, that we are not merely material beings, that life is not merely the space between birth and death, that the yearning for home that so many feel is not pathological but points to something real, to a dimension of existence that the material world cannot capture or contain. You are light, the Gnostics said. You are a stranger here, but you will not be a stranger forever. The way home exists. The ascent is possible. And when you make it, you will discover not something new, but something you always knew. Buried so deep that it took a lifetime of searching to remember. That you belong to the light. That you came from the light. That you are returning to the light. That you were light all along. May the gentle currents of time ease you into restful sleep.